Good evening. Good evening. Moluen. Nijani. Thank you very much. It gives me pleasure to see everyone so happy and so excited for this day. And we're just going to allow people to settle down. There's enough space for everyone. Once again, give yourselves a round of applause for making a big one. Right. Without further ado, I'm going to call upon Ms. Lizeka Twanda, the political editor of the Mail and Guardian, to come through. Lizeka. Lizeka is the main moderator for this evening, and she's going to be piloting this session for us this evening. Welcome, Lizeka. And then I also want to call upon Ms. Sarah Smith, the economics editor of the Mail and Guardian. She's going to be a co-moderator. Sarah, please come through. And I'm going to ask then, before I make the opening remarks, I'm going to ask Ms. Lizeka Twanda to invite the panelists in. And as you'll see, the panelists will come up front here. So I want us to do this. We give each one a round of applause and then wait and give the next one, and each one deserves your appreciation. Ms. Lizeka.
Thank you so much, Vasi. With us, our honored and esteemed guests, I'd like to welcome the EFF Deputy President, Mr. Floyd Shivambu. Thank you. We now welcome Action SA's Premier Candidate to the Eastern Cape, Mr. Ethel Trollip. Thank you, Mr. Trollip. The IFP Inkatha Freedom Party's Deputy President, Inkosi Mzamo Buthelezi. The ANC's National Executive Committee member, Pat Tau. Thank you, Mr. Tau. The Democratic Alliance's Chief Whip, Siviwe Khwarube. Thank you, Vasi, over to you.
Thank you very much. And once again, welcome to the panelists. And they're all going to give us a good debate this evening. Give them a good round of applause, all of them. Program Director, first of all, welcome everyone to the University of Fort Hare. This day has arrived, and I'm going to say, like they say, all protocols observed. There are too many people here to acknowledge. But first, I want to acknowledge the 5 participating political parties, the political parties that have agreed to participate in this debate. I also want to acknowledge, in similar vein, the panelists who are going to speak on behalf of these 5 parties. We're going to tell you how we came to these 5, and I'm glad that everyone is excited for this evening. But also I want to acknowledge and thank our partner in organizing this event, the Mail and Guardian. Thank you very much, the Mail and Guardian. We've come a long way. We've sat down many meetings. We've signed an agreement so that we can do this. More than that, we've also signed rules that are going to govern, which the moderators will spell out to you. I'm informed that we have in our midst traditional leaders, ministers, members of parliament, MECs, members of the provincial legislatures in different parts of the country, mayors, other elected public representatives, religious leaders, members of communities, members of the university community. Give them a round of applause, please, those ones. And of course, other partners and stakeholders of the university that we work with on a daily basis. But most importantly, and I think today we're going to look at ourselves differently, and I'm going to appeal that we look at ourselves differently. Because today we're coming here not just as supporters of parties, not just as an audience, but we are voters. We are voters this time. And the panelists are going to address us as voters or prospective voters for those who have not voted before. So once again, I want to welcome all of you, the voters who will come out in your numbers on the 29th of May. And just to say while I'm on that, this hall is a voting station on the 29th. So those who are in the area and all the students of the university will be voting in this hall right here. Now, let me take this opportunity to welcome you to the University of Fort Hare, an institution, this is very important, an institution that's been operating for the last 108 years. 108 years we've been operating. Exactly 100 years ago, in 1924, the university produced its first graduate, Z.K. Matthews, who later became Professor Z.K. Matthews. He went on to become a professor here at this university. He went on to become a national activist and national leader of the African National Congress. But most significantly, he also went on to become ambassador of the Republic of Botswana at the United Nations in the late 1960s. Now, please, once again, I want to pause at this moment. 100 years of producing professionals and graduates. That is no mean feat for anyone, for any institution. Let's celebrate that moment. We hold Z.K. Matthews up as an example, as an icon, and as a model of what the University of Fort Hare graduate looks like. If you want an example of the graduates produced by this university, look no further than Professor Z.K. Matthews. And that is very important in this context. And I also want that to inform this discussion. I want that part to inform this discussion. If you don't get it, ask the person next to you to explain. The first national elections debate, unbeknown to many, took place in 1994 when Nelson Mandela squared up against F.W. de Klerk in a widely televised debate on the future of the country. The debate, held on the 14th of April, 1994, less than 2 weeks before the historic elections, set the bar in terms of what the public should expect in an election debate and in an election. That debate focused on issues that each party felt were important for the future democracy. I want to underline, it focused on issues. And I suppose by holding this debate here, we're also saying we're not here for a beauty contest. We're here for the issues. We want the issues to come through, because these voters here, they want to hear. They're not going to vote you because you're wearing the best T-shirt, the best shirt, the best whatever, because your issues resonate with their needs, with their concerns, with their communities, with their families. Since then, we have not seen a similar engagement between main political parties before national elections. What we've tended to see, and those who have been around since, you'll see in 1999, each political leader throwing stones at another across the fence. Never before since 1994 have they gathered under one roof in one room and spoken and allowed the audience to interrogate and engage them directly. And that means, therefore, as we approach this session, we must approach it with that mindset. Let each one of them, give them a moment, give them a chance to speak, and then interrogate them by raising their question. I believe that there's going to be a roving microphone here. I also, and the moderators will explain to you also, that this event is live streamed. Is live streaming. There's a live stream thing which will be announced. I don't know these things. But against this background, therefore, of engagement and focus on issues, and in view of the momentous challenges that the country faces at the moment, the University of Fort Hare and the Mail and Guardian agreed to host this national debate. And one of our aims is to rekindle the spirit of open and transparent public debate. Open and transparent. Open and transparent. In other words, there are no holy cows. There are no holy cows, it's a public debate. That's how we understand it. So that the voting public can make informed choices. We believe that the debate and the format of this debate allows political leaders to engage directly and real time, and for the public to interrogate them in an open platform such as this one. We, as the University of Fort Hare, have the track record of producing generations of leaders and providing platforms for them to engage in open debates. Those who have been students at this debate could attest to that, to this university could attest to that. We take pride in the fact that our university has been and continues to be a crucible of democratic ideas and debate, which gave birth to leaders of various political persuasions. I want to underline that again. We trained and gave birth to leaders of all political persuasions in the country, all. The Mail and Guardian was a natural choice for us to partner with in organizing and hosting this debate. From the years of its early predecessor, the Weekly Mail, the newspaper has been a torchbearer of press freedom and press independence, and that provides quality news without fear, favor, or prejudice. We're very proud to be hosting this event together with them. Before I sit down, I want to assure the panelists, and now I'm being very serious. We want to assure the panelists, because our students and our staff know this, that you are very safe at Fort Hare. You are very safe at Fort Hare.
Yeah. Are you sure?
I saw outside kind of a larger than usual small battalion of police officers. Generally, we do without a single police officer on campus. And I'm saying this deliberately because there's a lot of that's been going out in the media, that's been going out and on television and in the newspapers. You know, when we invite someone, they phone, they say, "Is Fort Hare safe? Is Alice safe?" And for goodness sake, we live here in Alice. We work here in Alice. We are safe. And Deputy Minister Tau, we are very safe. But I also want to say that, and I want to underline this too, that it should never be. I want to say as I conclude that it should never be that we have to go to the President of the Republic to ask for protection, such as we did at the beginning of last year. It should never be. We should feel free, we should feel protected. It should never be that 3 ministers are dispatched to come here. It should never be that a national SAPS task team is dispatched here. And I would like, therefore, for you as a university, we are also a juristic person. We deserve protection, we deserve safety, we deserve all the freedoms. Finally, as I sit down, I want to ask you, each one of you, to answer this question at some point, and the moderators will see to this.
Thank you.
How do you plan to fix education in South Africa. But specifically, and in light of the stuff that's going down in the country, the mess, how do you plan? What's your plan for higher education? What is your plan for higher education? The majority or the large number of the people here are students. There's a mess now about funding and disbursement of funding. How do you plan to fix that? I'm saying this because this morning, as I close my file, this morning, I was called because the SRC was anxious that NSFAS allowances had not been paid as of this morning. But NSFAS only contacted us on the weekend, asking us to pay allowances on the weekend. And so we expected to pull out some magic from the bag and pay. How do we plan to fix higher education? Thank you very much and good luck to all the panelists.
Thank you so much, Visi. Visi, hey, you butchered my name. My name is Lize Gatandwa. I am the political editor at the Mail and Guardian. Now, before we get things started, I feel, and the Visi has already alluded to it, we need the rules. We need the rules of engagement. And my colleague, Sarah Smith, will paint the rules for everyone, not just the panelists, but the audience as well. If we could please pay attention to this moment.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight I have been tasked with running through tonight's rules. We will start with some opening remarks from each of our panelists who will have 2 minutes to address the audience. We will then move on to questions, which will be randomly drawn from a bowl and directed to one panelist. Said panelist will have 3 minutes to respond. Thereafter, each of the remaining panelists will have 90 seconds to rebut. After the debate, we will open the questions to the audience. That means you will have a chance to come up and ask a question to one of the panelists. I want people to remember that time limits will be enforced. And more importantly, panelists are reminded to avoid interrupting each other. We're here in the spirit of open and fair debate. And then also a reminder to our audience to listen and engage openly to views that you may oppose. And please afford this venue the esteem that it definitely deserves. And with that, I'll move on to my colleague, Lizeka.
Thank you so much, Sarah. For those who are not here, you are more than welcome to go to the Mail and Guardian's website or its YouTube pages for the live streaming of this event. But let's get things going, Sarah. Each and every panelist has got 2 minutes to give their opening remarks. And should we start with Mr. Floyd Shivambu?
No, thank you very much. No, thank you very much to the moderators of this debate, and I want to greet the Student Representative Council, which is led by the EFF Students Command here in the University of Fort Hare. It's part of the more than 90% Students Representative Councils in South Africa, which are led by the Student Command, but also want to, of course, pay tribute to University of Fort Hare, which has got the most outstanding alumni. Want to specifically outline and mention Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, Chris Hani, and Gavin Mbeki. Those are the people who got proper degrees from this university. They never went to a counter and they never required service of a cashier to get a degree. And thanks, Professor Buhlungu, for protecting this institution, because it's one of the most important things. We must never allow a situation where anyone purchases degrees from this institution. like the premier of this province tried to do. Now, the main focus of the EFF manifesto is one, on land, because our people are landless, is jobs, is stopping load shedding. But more importantly, is the ability to dynamically utilize South Africa's fiscal resources, like the budget, to drive industrial expansion and economic development and infrastructure in a way that is going to create millions of jobs for our people. But at the center of that, will be building state capacity such that the state is able to perform its own functions and not be a contracting and tendering state, because thus far, a tendering state has led to high levels of corruption, but also even political killings, including the one that occurred in this university. So that is the agenda that the Economic Freedom Fighters is up to in terms of what we stand for. And we are ready to take over the government of South Africa to give it the meaning that it requires.
Thank you, Mr.
Very much.
Shivambu.
Thank you, Mr. Shivambu. As the economics editor of the Mail and Guardian, I'm very interested to hear what possible future finance minister has to say tonight.
It's not just possible, it's going to be.
Hey.
Next, we'll move on to Action SA. Mr. Trollip, please give us your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are here on the eve of our 7th democratic election to debate the state of the country and the province. And this debate is about an evaluation of the performance of the government. Our eyes are on the government, represented by Mr. Tau. The ultimate test of a healthy democracy is whether you have a change in government frequently. We need a change in government in this country. The last time I was in this hallowed hall was in 2016 at the special national memorial service of the late Premier Makhenkesi Stofile. I attended in my capacity as the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay. Bakhona abantu out bebesithi akasoze abekhona umayor we-DA eBhayi ebekhona. The hall was full of ANC luminaries. Cyril Ramaphosa was here, Kgalema Motlanthe was here, Jacob Zuma wasn't here on the insistence of the family. Sipho Pitjana spoke at that memorial service, and he spoke boldly and he spoke openly about the problems in the ANC and their woeful track record of governance. He told of Stofile's, and I quote, yearning for the movement to get back to its former glory, unquote. He invoked the title of a book written by a former ANC leader, Dr. Benson Khubusane, Zemkinkomo Makwalandini. He spoke about the ANC allowing its heritage to be stolen and lost. And he said, you say that you're against corruption, but you steal people's money. He said that the ANC should introspect and save itself and avoid self-inflicted wounds. His words were prophetic. Sadly for you as the ANC government and the ANC, his exhortations fell on deaf ears. Our government has developed a tin ear.
Thank you, Mr. Trollip.
The Inkatha Freedom Party's Deputy President, please give us your welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much. And good evening to you all. While we may appreciate the gains we have made over the past 30 years since the inception of our democracy, we unfortunately cannot turn a blind eye on the current realities that millions of South Africans are facing. The coming elections provide a moment of great significance for all of us. It's a chance to reverse the damage done over the past years. The fabric of our society is strained by the weight of poverty, hunger, and inequalities, and this has hedged the deep divide between those who have and those who have not. Our people's dignity is under assault as necessities like clean water and sanitation remains out of reach for too many. The infrastructure that should be the backbone of our society is crumbling, a testament to the service delivery failures plague our communities. We are confronted by the scourge of crime, gender-based violence. Our women and young girls walk in the shadow of fear, a damning indictment to our collective failure to protect the most vulnerable in our society. These are not challenges I'm mentioning. It serves as a clarion call for all South Africans to no longer accept the status quo, but to go out and vote. The IFP stands ready to lead this country, and we stand ready to serve you. We are not just asking for your vote, but we ask you to join the cause to fight for South Africa where everyone can succeed, no matter where it comes from. South Africa where safety, education, health are not just for the wealthy, but for everyone else. This is not about politics. It's about taking back our country. It's about making sure that our children and their children inherit a country that is better than what it is today. So trust us to save you.
Thank you so much. The African National Congress's Mr. Parkstow, please.
Thank you very much.
Just wait.
Thank you very much to our facilitators. The agenda of the African National Congress has been about fundamental socio-economic transformation and remains about fundamental socio-economic transformation. And we've got a track record on fundamental socio-economic transformation. On the economic front, we can say that in 1994, 8 million people were in jobs. Today, 16.2 million people are in jobs. We can say that this is a government that has driven an agenda of transformation in the economy. We've got at the level of preferential procurement, direct procurement from Black-owned companies, from women-owned companies. We've got at the level of policy, broad-based Black economic empowerment that has ensured that Black people are able to access opportunities in the private sector, in the public sector, and that we measure companies on the basis of that delivery. We've got at the level of employment equity, the reality that many Black people hold senior management positions in the public sector, in the private sector. We've got bankers who are CEOs, we've got miners who are CEOs as a result of the policies of the African National Congress. Now, what are we saying going forward? What we're saying going forward is that we need to accelerate this agenda of fundamental socio-economic transformation. Our commitment in our manifesto is that we will create, through direct job creation initiatives, 2.2 million jobs. We have said that as the ANC, we will focus on industrialization and reindustrialization. We will ensure that new industries are able to grow at the back of our mineral wealth and the wealth that we own as a country, so that we're able to create more jobs and more entrepreneurs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tao. And the audience, please, you're reminded to respect our panelists as they give their remarks. With that, we can move on to DA Chief Whip Siviwe Khabube.
It's Siviwe Khabube. Molweni, it feels good to be home today. It feels good to be back in my home province. Having grown up here for 18 years, this institution was always inspirational. In fact, the majority of my family members have been graduates of this university. And so I give you honor, Prof. Buhlungu and the team for keeping this institution going. And so as we gather here 30 years into our democracy, we must make sure that we really do evaluate where we are as a country. And we must be honest about where we are. Today, 30 million South Africans are living in poverty. 7 out of 10 young people do not have work. In fact, the hunger and the unemployment crisis is so dire in the Eastern Cape that half of this province does not work. Abantu abatsha bahlala ezindlini komawabo befumbathe izidanga bengakwazi ufumana imisebenzi. And millions of children in this province are dying of starvation. And so we need change, and we need change urgently. The ANC has had its run. It's about time that we show up in our numbers and vote out a government that does not care. And so the choice is simple. The choice is simple in this election. We can either continue voting for a government that has failed and will continue to fail us, or we can vote for a government that will pull people out of poverty, that will put young people into work, that will keep our communities safe, that will keep the lights on, that will keep your taps running of water, that will cut the kind of corruption that is seeing the kind of cutting of funding that you are experiencing with NSFAS. And that organization is not only represented here, but it represented in all 9 parts of the country, and that's the Democratic Alliance.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think since the host has posed a question about higher learning institutions, the host of and our VC, the Vice Chancellor of this esteemed university, did ask, how do you plan to resolve the funding crisis at higher learning institutions? We will get to that ball, but I think that this question is a very important one, given that we are at a higher learning institution with 90% of the learners dependent on NSFAS. So, Mr. Floyd Shivambu, perhaps you could start. We'll give you 3 minutes to respond to that question.
Look, the question of higher education funding has to be located within the broader framework of expanding the fiscal capacity of the state, the money which government collects in order to provide basic services for all. So to increase the allocation that you give to higher education, it means that you must increase the revenue that you collect from the economy, from society, so that it's far much bigger to allocate much more adequately. And we've made several illustrations that the revenue collection in South Africa has not been significantly increasing because the economy in the past 12 years has grown at average 0.8%, which is no growth at all, because when you count that against population growth, it is drowned into permanent insignificance. So what has to be purposefully done, one, is to grow the economy so that the revenue base is expanded. 2, you need to optimally collect the revenue from particularly the extractive industries, because majority of the companies that are playing roles in the mining sector are not paying taxes in South Africa. They always bloat their expenses so that they can avoid taxes. Then we need to then optimally collect the revenue, but also there is sensible interest from prescribed assets. Like the government employees pension fund has got upward of 2 trillion rands, which is being invested in the listed stocks. And if we can have a discussion, it is sensible, particularly for the children of public representatives and public servants, to be financed through prescribed assets that can come from the government employees pension fund, to have quality education for everyone. And that is what we have to do to expand the pie as to what should happen. But at the center of what should happen with higher education, by the way, Prof, is the quantitative and qualitative expansion of the post-secondary education and training space. Because currently the secondary spaces exits upward of 1 million children every year, whether they exit via grade 10, grade 11, but the spaces that are practically available year on year always hover below 250 and 300,000. And what then happens to the rest of the 700,000? They then join the army of the unemployed, who then get trapped in drugs and crime and in a vicious circle that is not sustainable. So we need to have to resolve the revenue collection streams, have optimal resources available, and then we then get to qualitatively and quantitatively expand the higher education space so that anyone, any children want, or any child wants to go to get a degree, must be able to get that particular degree and later on get jobs that are sustainable to look after themselves. That is what we think should happen in relation to higher education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shivambu. Mr. Trollip, you have 90 seconds to rebut what Mr. Shivambu has said.
I'm not here to rebut what he had to say. I want to talk about the government failure in education. Our education system fails because we've had 2 ministers for basic education and tertiary education in their offices for 15 years. Our grade 10 learners cannot read with understanding, and we have got students that have not got funding for food and accommodation, and NSFAS lost 7 billion rand. Imali lakek, iya kiwa. And imali kiwe. We need to fix early childhood development to prepare children to be ready for school, and we need to help schools and management of schools to deal with discipline and to teach people and have resources. If we don't do that, nobody is going to pass at tertiary education. We also need a vocational stream from grade 10 so that we don't have graduates sitting at home with their parents that have sacrificed everything to educate them to get a degree that is worthless. We need a realignment with the global skills requirement. We need curriculum change, but more importantly, we need leaders in education that will inspire the next generation to learn. And we must stop referring to people as clever blacks when they ask difficult questions. We want everybody to be clever, black and white. Thank you.
Dr. Buteles, take it away, 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. I think as the IFP, we are very clear as to where the problem lies. First and foremost, we are going to make sure that we allow people to do what they are best at, meaning removing political interference from institutions of higher learning. Secondly, we are going to make sure that all the monies that's supposed to go to students are actually transferred to universities and institutions of higher learning for easy access and accountability. And thirdly, we are going to close all the leakages that are within the system in a form of corruption, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and reprioritize those monies to institutions of higher learning and many more like that. Also, we are going to make sure that we align government department. In this case, the Department of Social Development must be aligned with institutions of higher learning, so that a child that has been a beneficiary of a grant from a high school has not to apply for NSFAS when it enters into institutions of higher learning, because already that child has been dependent from the state the whole of his or her life.
Thank you so much. Now from the ANC.
Well, firstly, our starting point is about access, ensuring that people who would not have had access to higher education gain access to higher education. And that is about ensuring that the poor are able to access NSFAS as a means through which they are able to get educated, they are able to get accommodation, and they are able to get a subsidy to enable them to access higher education. Secondly, it is about the missing middle, creating opportunities for the missing middle to get blended financing so that they also can access higher education. And in relation to the higher education sector itself, the issue is about expanding our higher education system. We have just built 2 new universities and are in the process of initiating other new universities. We're expanding the TVET sector with a particular focus on ensuring that we build the skills that our economy needs and that our people are able to access higher education, even through TVET colleges, as they expand and as they create the necessary skills to grow the economy. And it is also about ensuring specialized skills in the education of the economy of the future, so that we give access to higher education that enables learners to gain the skills to participate in the economy of the future and to help grow this country into its future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Kwahube, please take it away.
The first thing we ought to do is to fire Minister Blade Nzimande. That's the very first thing. We need to fire Minister Blade Nzimande, and then we need to fire the ANC at the polls on the 29th of May. It is the first way, this is the only way we are going to begin to reform the way in which higher education is done. The second thing we need to do is we need to clean out the rot at institutions such as NSFAS. The minister, the deputy minister, Mr. Tao, he was talking about how the ANC's vision has been about looking after the poor. You are not looking after the poor when abantwana belamba ezikolweni, when they're not getting their allowances. You are not looking after the poor when abantu belala ezikolweni besiya beyofunda belambile. That is a lie and you know it. And the problem is that it starts in your organization because you guys don't care about accountability. You don't care about cleaning out the rot when you see it. And so my urge here is that we need to make sure that we look at institutions such as NSFAS. How do we decentralize the institution so that it is closer to learners, it is closer to students, that it is accessible to them at their universities? We're not going to be able to have any of these interventions unless we fire the government that has brought us this crisis in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you for that. The audience is reminded to refrain from booing our panelists. We will now move on to draw a question for Mr. Trollip. The question we have is about the NHI. With the NHI seemingly forging ahead, does your party believe that there is still space for private healthcare providers in our country? And please provide reasons and what role they will play.
Thank you very much. Isn't it ironic that the government that's responsible for a collapsed public health system wants to introduce a NHI? We say, before you do anything, introducing anything new, you've got to fix what is broken. You've got to fix primary healthcare clinics, got to fix hospitals where women are giving birth on the floor. When people are going to get treatment and they get given Panado, you need to fix that. And we believe simply throwing the baby out with the bathwater is not going to help anyone. That's why Herman Mashaba, when he appointed a team called Team Fix South Africa of competent, capable people, not politicians, people who have come out of the private sector with experience and expertise, he appointed Dr. Kgosi Letlhaphe. Kgosi Letlhaphe was the first professional ophthalmologist in this country. He was the chairperson of the South African Medical Council, and he was also the chairperson of the World Medical Council. I listened to him speak on Radio SA-FM this morning, and he said, we need to create a partnership between the private and public health systems. Get them to work together. Because at one stage in the history of this country, both of those systems were acclaimed. They had some of the best doctors in the world. In fact, those doctors are now practicing all over the world, but not in South Africa. We are not paying doctors, yet we are bringing doctors from Cuba to come and work in our hospitals. But he did say today, there are doctors working in hospitals from Cuba because our doctors that we've trained at our universities do not want to work in those communities. We cannot subsidize education for 7 years of medical students and they tell us where they will or not work. We need doctors that are going to look after the healthcare of the people of this country, and we need doctors to hold hands and work together in the private and public sector. If you do away with the private sector healthcare, you are going to break healthcare in this country. But one of the very best ways to fix public health is to say to the people that are seated here, that are going to be in Parliament, and the President and the Deputy President, that you are not going to fly to Russia to get health care. You are not going to go to a private facility to get health care. You, as a member of Parliament and a public representative, will go to a state hospital where you will get your health care.
Thank you, sir. We will now hear from the EFF, who will have 90 seconds to respond.
Thank you very much. You know, talking about Cuba, the EFF is of a firm belief that we should model South Africa's healthcare system alongside Cuba's healthcare system, where the primary and most basic instrument for primary healthcare is a polyclinic, then followed by clinics which would be alongside the wards as demarcated in South Africa today. Then you can have the primary hospitals, then tertiary hospitals. But we should then purposefully pursue a preventive measure. So if we were to look briefly into the numbers of Cuba, which are easy to summarize, is that Cuba doesn't have the socio-economic development levels that qualifies it to have infant mortality rate, which is lower than the US, than Japan, than the most industrialized nations. Even the life expectancy in Cuba is far upward the most developed nations because they contain diseases before they escalate into the tertiary hospitals for hospitalization. South Africa doesn't have a healthcare system. It has got a hospitalization system where you wait for people to get sick so that you can take them into hospitals. But what we are proposing as the EFF, and it's in detail, is that we should have primary healthcare that prevents diseases. We're already doing that model in the cities of Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni, where we're leading 114 clinics in the city of Johannesburg and 77 clinics in Ekurhuleni. If you check the programs of the EFF, it's about public awareness and preventing diseases before they escalated into tertiary hospitals. That is our philosophy in terms of health.
Thank you, Mr. Shivambu.
We will now hear from the ANC.
Well, thank you very much. Don't
sorry.
worry if there's a bit of
Sorry,
booing.
I've missed the,
Oh.
the IFP. Sorry, my bad.
Okay,
Please.
thank you very much. I think the IFP, first and foremost, we support the universal health access for everybody. That's a given. But we still believe that private sector still has a room to play because you cannot deny any South Africans his or her right to choose as to where he wants to be cured. But what needs to happen is that you need a government that will actually sort the problems that are facing the healthcare institutions, the issue of infrastructure, the issue of staffing, and the issue of access. We know that many people can't have access to healthcare facilities because they are very far. Government is not actually having a clear plan as to how he make those facilities closer to people. So what needs to happen is that you take them to where people are, make sure that you improve on the infrastructure, because what is happening today, the hospitals that were known to be the places where people are cured, people are asking for pass outs because they have become places for wait and die. So if therefore you say shut down the private sector because of that, where these people are going to go? Improve the services, improve the infrastructure, and make sure that we've got qualified nurses and which are taken care of and are paying handsomely so they are able to commit into the public service. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buthelezi, and apologies again. Mr. Tao, sorry, your turn now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was saying, don't worry about the booing. It's sometimes a winds through which people are afraid of the message that's being still spoken. The National Health Insurance is about universal access to health. It is about universal access to life. Because in reality, your ability to live should not be inhibited by your socioeconomic status. It should be that even if you are poor, you're able to access health, you're able to get a doctor, you're able to get decent treatment, and that's what the National Health Insurance System is about. What people are not saying is that, in fact, we have two systems of health in the country. We've got a public health system that's under strain with public investment. We've got a private system that's essentially about those who can afford, those who've got private health insurance. But what they are not admitting is that even as you have private health insurance, you get a rebate on your taxes. So the state subsidizes your access to the private health system. Why should it only be left to those that can afford to access those health systems? It must be that everybody in this country who needs to live a better life can be able to access health across the board through the NHI. And as we seek to implement the National Health Insurance, we understand that there will be resistance because some would want to protect the little that is there, but we are about the majority of the people of this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now from the DA.
Universal healthcare is something that South Africa should certainly strive for, and that's what the DA believes in. But there are a couple of myths that I would like to bust that the Deputy Minister here is spewing. Number one, South Africa has a two-tier system, of course. That's the one thing. However, poor South Africans in this country have been subjected to a broken healthcare system for decades. In fact, not so long ago, we had a former minister, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, who came here to launch Ikiriva, saying to people that he's going to be delivering these to Ezlalin. And yet, after that, we found out that Batya Imali of millions that was meant to go to people during a COVID-19 crisis. And we're wanting to start another SOE for healthcare, and you think that sizothemba aba bantu bazingcuka ezombethe ifelele gusha. We're not going to do that. What the DA would do in government is, one, revolutionize the way in which primary health care is done. Number two, we would make sure that the resources that we have, we invest in the infrastructure that healthcare so desperately needs. It cannot be that people are still being seen, they are still being seen in mud houses. We've got to invest in infrastructure, and we would expand the kind of work that we've done in the Western Cape that will make sure that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, you deserve good quality healthcare.
Thank you so much, Siviwe. Nkosi Buthelezi, ndizawuqala ngawe ngoku. I will dig into this fishbowl and all the parties on stage have been involved in dysfunctional coalitions. What role has your party played in the dysfunction, and how will you remedy it going forward?
Firstly, I wouldn't say that the IFP has been involved in dysfunctioning coalition. That is not true at all. The IFP is a long party, having been involved in this coalition before, even now, where most parties can't achieve their 50+1. Even when we were in charge in the Province of Natal, having won by the outright majority, we invited other parties, including the ANC, to come and govern with us. So we are not newcomers in this game. And in every municipality as we speak, the IFP, most of them, is leading with the other parties. There is absolute stability in those municipalities. But what needs to happen, because we know for a fact that you've got some parties who are into this coalition, not for the good cause, but for personal gains as the individual parties. You need to eliminate those parties. Make sure that if you form such coalitions, you are forming with like-minded parties who are into this to deliver services, and make sure that you do not allow this kind of kingmaker, because some parties will come this morning having agreed that we are going to govern the government. Then the next morning they come and they say, this is what we demand. Failing it, we pull off. There must be a clear legislation that will fix every party that gets into such an arrangement for the rest of the term, so that even those unscrupulous parties who wants to embezzle money through these coalitions are not given a chance to do so. Once they get into such coalitions, they are fixed for the rest of the term. Everyone to come and vote and make sure that there is service delivery is their own baby to carry, but it can't undermine issues of service delivery. And in every coalition that involves the IFP, there is stability. You go to Joburg, when the IFP was part of that setup, there was stability. Immediately the IFP was out, everything collapsed. So the IFP is the voice of reason, the part that can be trusted in in all these coalitions that are to be formed. It can't survive without the IFP being there.
Thank you so much, Nkosi Buthelezi. I'm going to come to you, Mr. Parkstall. Coalitions. You've been involved in them. Have they been dysfunctional? And what has been your role in the dysfunction?
Well, let me start with a point that raised by Nkosi Buthelezi, the coalition in Johannesburg. The reality is that under the leadership of the Democratic Alliance, with all the parties underwritten by the EFF, because the EFF have admitted that they used to instruct Herman Mashaba what to do in Johannesburg, literally collapsed that municipality. And that reality can be proven, because if you look at the annual financial statements of 2016, they would indicate a municipality that was cash flush, that had a strong balance sheet, that was investing in infrastructure and in its people. In a matter of 2 years, that municipality was broke, dysfunctional, with the IFP, while Action SA was leading, now that Mashaba was leading that coalition under the TA. So the reality is that coalitions have not worked. They've proven to be difficult to manage, but the reality is that they've also thrown in people into the governance system that have collapsed the municipalities. You can go to Tshwane today, and the reality of the experience of the people of the capital city of this country is a very difficult reality. And that reality is what the people feel on a daily basis. So these have not worked because of opportunism, because, as the TA's partner said, because of the arrogance, amongst others, of the Democratic Alliance. Thank you very much.
Siviwe, I think it's appropriate for you to come in on this one.
Absolutely. I think the clear thing here is that the ANC is being relegated to an opposition party day in, day out. And so that's what we're going to see from the 29th of May. And so coalitions are part and parcel of South Africa's democracy. This is where we are now. Voters are giving us this kind of mandate. They're saying these are the people that we want to co-govern. So you've got to find yourselves in a situation where you ask yourselves, how are we being politically mature as political parties? How are we putting the citizens and the residents first in the work that we do, and how we prioritizing service delivery? It's rich for Mr. Dawo to come here and say that they left a municipality that was cash flush. It's because it was good, and now it's no longer nice because they're being relegated out of these municipalities. And so coalitions are here to stay. What we need is mature political leadership. What we need is legislation that is going to make sure that we regularize and we give a legal framework for coalitions to work under. We've seen this example working in countries like Kenya. There are examples on the continent where coalitions are here to stay. We must stop saying to people that they should not make a decision that they want based on the parties that they want to vote for. This is the democracy that was fought for. Let people go and vote and elect who they want. You can't blackmail people and emotionally manipulate people into voting for you just because you think it doesn't work, because it doesn't work for you.
Dabulela Siviwe, EFF Deputy President.
I must start with you.
I want to start with you, sir.
No, that's fine. Look, the discussion of coalition, in this panel can be complex because I formed part of a collective decision that removed Parkster as the mayor of Johannesburg correctly in 2016. And we removed this one next to me as well, Nelson Mandela. But there is no instability in any of the municipalities where the EFF is in government. We're responsible for key critical departments in Nelson Mandela, electricity plus infrastructure, but in the city of Johannesburg, we're responsible for community health and social development, but also we're responsible for public safety as well. So if you want to know that there is no unstable government in Johannesburg, go and skip robots there. You will see that the police that are under the guidance of the EFF will take you to prison. We're very decisive and much more extended the roles of public safety far beyond the just traffic management to now fighting crime much more directly by establishing units that are looking into crime fighting in the city of Johannesburg. In the city of Ekurhuleni, we have been leading a stable government. None of our members of the mayoral committees in Mohale City, in Metsimaholo, a local municipality, in Western District, all of them have been firm in terms of principle. And we, of course, will have these elements who will come and say they want to challenge the authority of the EFF because they want to drag them into corrupt activities. And whenever we refuse, they want to take out of government. But otherwise, it's so far so good. We're demonstrating our capacity as the EFF.
Thank you, Mr. Shivambu. Young as you are, as Action SA, Mr. Trollip, you have been in coalitions. Have you played a part in the dysfunction in those coalitions?
The days of one-party dominance and hegemony in South Africa are over. So the ANC must get to grips with that. The days of one-party dominance are over. Coalitions are going to be here for a long, long time. The track record of coalitions in this country is not great, but it's getting better, and you can only get experience by doing things. And the one thing about experience, you learn about who you can trust and who you can't trust. Very simple. And there's some political parties in this country that have turned coalition making or breaking into a transactional deal for politics of the stomach. And they will tell you how well it's going in those coalitions. It's not going well. They got rid of a coalition government in Nelson Mandela Bay, and what have they got now? Chaos and corruption. But some political parties like chaos, because then you can be corrupt. I also want to say that there are political parties like the EFF that have said if they don't get a majority, they'll give their votes to the ANC on condition they make this man the Minister of Treasury. Why? Kutheni befuna ingqowa yemali bafuna untshontsha. And then there's another political party that is a member of our MPC that says they will consider a coalition with the least worst option. We're not going in and out of coalitions. We are with the multi-party charter. We've signed that charter, and we're not going into coalition with them
Thank
or
you,
them.
Mr. Tolan.
Thank you.
Sarah, over to you.
Mr. Tao, this question is for you. Today we have a climate-related question. We realized that many climate-related issues were not reflected in some of the manifestos. I wanted to ask, is your party ready to take on mining houses for the pollution they have caused?
Well, firstly, I don't think that we should look at the private sector as adversaries. I think that we should look at them as partners in creating jobs and in growing the economy of this country. Now, are we prepared to take on the mining houses? We certainly have regulatory mechanisms that take on the mining houses, that ensure that the polluter is held accountable, that they're able to pay for their pollution, and that they are able to support those communities that have been affected by their pollution. But it is also about a partnership that needs to evolve. So as the African National Congress, we have committed to the just energy transition with a fundamental underlining of just. And just is about ensuring that in those communities where there will be a transition of economic activity, that economic alternatives are looked at, that people are reskilled, that you're able to ensure participation along entire value chains. And this is not pie in the sky. We've already engaged in commitments and discussions around blended financing models to ensure that our municipalities, our government, and our enterprises are able to access resources to be able to participate in the green economy initiatives of this country, so that the green economy becomes part of the economy of the future, so that we create justice for our people, but also justice to the entire environment and the climate. The issue about climate change is fundamental. We are experiencing the reality of climate change on a regular basis. Flooding in KZN in the past week is the reality of that. Flooding in parts of the Eastern Cape every December is the reality of climate change. How do we ensure that the municipality in Port St. John's is able to address the impact of climate change? And that is through investment in infrastructure. So when we're talking about just investing, it's also about investing in infrastructure for adaptation, so that you're able to attenuate the water, you're able to stop it from having the impact that it has, and you're able to develop the partnerships with business and the private sector to deal with the implications of climate change and what that means for us. Now, coming back to your point that said, are we prepared to hold the private sector accountable? But not only are we prepared to hold the private sector accountable, we're prepared to hold the public sector accountable for their deeds, their conduct, change policy and programs so that you ensure that you reduce the impact of climate change on the people of this country, but also not just see it as a problem, but see it as a crisis that creates new opportunities for the growth of our economy. And we've already entered into the appropriate partnerships as the government of this country to ensure that we can access the resources from the global community, but also from the private sector to invest in climate change, adaptation, and mitigation measures. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We'll now move on to the DA.
Thank you very much. I think there are some industries in South Africa, like mining, which must be cultivated in order for these industries to create jobs. And I probably for the one and the only time this evening, I will agree with Mr. Tao that we need to find partnership between the public sector and the private sector, because it is only in that partnership that you can harness jobs. But this does not mean that you can essentially negate the kind of pollution or deposits that companies are making. Companies must operate within a framework where they know that they need to be able to abide by the rules. But Party's desire is simply this, that the Just Energy Transition Plan should not be an opportunity for the cadres of the ANC to loot. It must be truly just. It needs to include people in our communities. It needs to make sure that as we transition from one way of doing mining or one way of running this industry, that we do not leave people behind. Because what we have learned in the past, and we know this for a fact, that the ANC will never, ever let an opportunity to loot go. And so we must treat the private sector as a partner. We must embrace the transition into green energy, but we must not leave communities behind, because ultimately it is with partnership with them too that we can make it work.
Thank you. EFF, will you also agree with Mr. Tao tonight?
We don't agree. We don't agree with. And so, this is what is going to happen when we take power. We're going to continue to produce electricity from coal and fossil fuel sources. That is decisive. We're not apologetic, because this neo-colonial science about climate change is only being applied and imposed on the African continent, where they say to us that leave coal, leave natural gases, but bring it to us so that we can continue to industrialize and grow our economies. If we're going to stop coal, it must be stopped from being exported as well. Why is it that the coal is only stopped when it's supposed to give us electricity, which in a modern industrial world is essential for basic livelihoods? We are going to investigate and implement the clean coal technologies which the Chinese government is working on for majority of their new power stations now. But coal will continue to be the primary source of energy in South Africa, so that we've got dependable supply of electricity, one. Two, we're going to convert the liquefied natural gases into electricity, so that we electrify not only South Africa, but the entire subcontinent. We need electricity in the entire continent, and we have to optimally utilize all our natural resources to give electricity for our people, because we can't have sustainable livelihoods without the optimal usage of our natural resources. We'll continue to do so. We're not going to be misled by imperialists anyway. We'll never do that.
Thank you so much. Action essay.
There's no doubt that mining houses are responsible for pollution. Just go to Mpumalanga and you'll see that it's black. It's black from the air or from the ground. Water's black, maize is black, everything's black. There is pollution. But here's the problem. We've got legislation to deal with polluters. We've got the mining charter that's very clear about what your responsibilities are as a mining operation. The problem is that we have a government that is notoriously bad at applying the law and enforcing the law. And we know why. Because you've got to start with yourself if you've got to enforce the law. So most of the top leaders in the ANC are all involved in mining. They've all got their fingers in mining. They all got vested interests. They don't want to clean up the mess that they're making, because it costs money to clean up the mess that you make when you pollute the countryside. They're also responsible, and I agree with Mr. Shavambu, they're also responsible for exporting the best coal in this country. And they expect to run our coal-fired power stations with poor-grade coal. And there's such a racket going on there is that most of the coal is just rocks anyway, and they break our Eskom furnaces. So what we're saying is the ANC is notoriously bad at burning diesel. They're burning diesel now to keep the lights on. Eskom is the greatest threat to pollution in this country. They're the biggest polluters. They are inept, they're corrupt, and we need to break the Eskom monopoly. And we need to sort out the wastewater crisis in this country due to pollution.
Thank you.
Our water is polluted.
Thanks. Lastly, the IFP.
Thank you very much. I think the issue of accountability is not a question at all. The IFP will ensure that there is accountability, but more than that, consequence management. What we are seeing today happening is the failure of the ANC, who are unable to enforce whatever piece of legislation that is there to protect the most vulnerable. In fact, what is happening is that when those that are charged to actually enforce this legislation, they accept bribes from those companies and then let everything go because they are so much corrupt. So the IFP will make sure that we enforce this legislation and make sure that all those companies that are responsible are paying the price for that. But as the IFP, we are going to continue using coal as our resource because we've got that in plenty, so we cannot abandon that, because even this, what we call the just transition, how can it be a just transition if it's actually at the expense of the most of the poor? How can we call this transition that we are all talking about if it's going to actually cost our people the jobs that they are having? So the IFP is saying we've got modern technology, we must continue to use coal and use those modern technologies to deal with the issues of emissions.
Thank you so much. I will now turn to my colleague, Lizeka.
Thank you, Sarah. Let me just, I believe it's your turn, Siviwe. Why has the climate crisis not been given prominent attention in your manifesto?
I would disagree that it has not been given any prominence in our manifesto. I think we have really extensively covered what our view is in terms of the climate crisis, government's role, the private sector's role, and as most importantly, what members of the public and communities' role is when it comes to mining and when it comes to the climate crisis in particular. As we have heard and as we have seen across South Africa, we're starting to see the results of the climate crisis present itself across the country. We are seeing the kind of things, the kind of floods we're seeing in KwaZulu-Natal, we've seen in this province. And so it says to us that as a country, we've arrived at a place where the climate crisis cannot just only be a nice to have conversations around dinner tables. It is now something that is important. It is now something that needs to feature prominently in government's agenda. But it's also important to make sure that communities are not left behind. And this is an important point to make, because as we're talking about communities and as we're talking about climate change, it is the people on the ground who are facing the harshest kind of conditions that we are seeing. It is the people on the ground who have to be partners with government and the private sector in meeting some of our targets. And so I disagree with the notion that it hasn't received prominence. I think, in fact, I urge people to go and read our manifesto, the DA's manifesto, on this particular issue, and you will see that we have some tangible steps. We've got some good ideas about how we can get particularly communities involved in the space.
Thank you, Siviwe. Mr. Shivambu, has climate change received prominence in your manifesto?
Yes, it has received maximum attention, particularly in relation to the wastewater treatment process. That is where we give a far much more substantial perspective as to what do we do with the 1,200 wastewater treatment plants which were last touched in 1994. Majority of the times, all these people who have been municipalities have never paid attention to wastewater treatment processes of the water that comes from household use and industries. That is what we're going to focus on. The one climate change that we're not going to be duped into focusing on is the one that says that we must switch off electricity because we want to save the climate. And these people who are saying we must switch off electricity are taking our coal to go and produce electricity in America and Europe and everywhere else where they come from. That we're not going to do. We're going to optimally utilize our natural resources to have electricity here. We will deal with mitigating factors. There are lots of technological innovations, including from the CSIRR, which is the South African Research Institute, which then deals with how do we mitigate the danger of climate change that will come out of fossil fuels, out of liquefied natural gas when you're converting it into electricity. We will look into that science, not this neo-colonial imperialist imposition of climate change agenda, which we'll never agree with. That is what we stand on as the EFF, and we're firm on that.
Thank you, Mr. Shivambu. Mr. Trollip?
You know, it's not often that you'll hear a political party praising the media. But I must say that after we'd presented our manifesto, it was after a number of these parties, we were near the end. Daily Maverick said it was well costed. Ferial Haffajee said that it was level-headed and innovative and with proposals that just might do the trick. We're a new political party in South Africa. We've got new ideas. We had an amazing policy conference where we had input from all South Africans, we have got some new innovative ideas to make our country work. We want to fix it. We don't want to deal with the unemployment that has been bequeathed upon us by the government that says that they've created socio-economic transformation. What nonsense. We have the highest unemployment rate ever in this country. Socio-economic transformation, my foot. We have more people dependent on grants than ever before. We have a government that breastfeeds about that. It's a shame. We should have a government that celebrates every million less people dependent on Amatamba, Millet, or 350 rand a month. And why do we have unemployment? Because nobody in the world wants to do business with us because of crime and corruption. Not even our own investors in this country want to invest. So how on earth will we attract foreign direct investment with an ANC government? We need a new government.
Thank you, Mr. Trollip.
I think as the IFP, we speak a lot about issues of environment, and our founder, Prince Mangosu Buthelezi, was an environmentalist himself, and myself seated here, I'm also an environmentalist. We are owning, as my community owns, a game reserve where we donated thousands of hectares to nature conservation, which shows that we are committed to issues of nature. And we are advocating that communities must also follow the suit, where we are going to contribute more of our land to contribute to the national, what you call, percentage of 10% of our country being set aside for nature conservation. So the IFP is very clear. We are not like advocating only, we are actively involved in issues of nature conservation, as I made an example myself and our founder. So I think that's a written statement that everyone could see. You can Google Itala Game Reserve that's owned by my community, proudly so.
Mr. Tau, does the climate agenda receive enough prominence?
Well, let me start by rebutting the suggestion that nobody wants to do business with this country. Here in the Eastern Cape, VW has committed to produce a new set of vehicles and expand their production in South Africa in the Eastern Cape. Here in the Eastern Cape, we have a new original equipment manufacturer to produce new cars that will be manufactured in this country. To suggest that nobody wants to talk to us is pie in the sky, because the reality is that you don't want to see it because it's difficult for you to see as growth and development happens in front of your eyes. That development happens. Now, is climate change prominent in our agenda? It certainly is. Firstly, I think I should say that the ANC and the ANC-led government has continued to subscribe to global good governance. We believe that we are part of the global community of nations. Therefore, multilateral agreements are important in the way in which the world addresses collective challenges, such as climate. So we're part of the Paris Accord, and we've committed to that to ensure that we're able to address these challenges. And in this regard, what are we doing? We're mobilizing resources both locally and internationally. We're mobilizing partners both locally and internationally to intervene in climate change, not just dealing with climate change from the point of view of pollution, but also the impact of climate change. How to ensure that our people and our economy is ready to deal with the impact of climate change, and that's our agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Tau. Siviwe, Mr. Trollip raised an important point earlier on. I'm going to go and bit rogue here and talk about perhaps the point that was raised by Mr. Trollip, and this is to you as well, Nkosi Buthelezi, around whether these two parties are willing to go into a coalition with the ANC. A lot has been said. The DA leader has said that it would be the least worst option to veer away from an ANC-EFF coalition. The Inkatha Freedom Party's leader said that there would be decisions made should the multi-party charter not be able to go over the line, 51%. Now, I want to ask you both to elaborate whether the DA and the IFP are willing to go into a coalition with the ANC. And to the ANC, Action SA, and EFF, if you could possibly talk to whether you are willing to go into a government of national unity, and what would that look like?
Thank you very much, Lizega. First of all, I think I want to state up front that the Democratic Alliance is not interested in resuscitating the ANC from its deathbed. That's the first and foremost thing. And the second thing is that there is intention behind having formed what we call a multi-party charter, which is a combination of political parties that are sharing values, that are sharing goals for what would be their goals and priorities in government. The reason why we did that, the reason why it was important to get together before even an election, is because it was to make sure that we iron out the issues that we don't agree on, to iron out the issues that we can agree on, but also that we iron out what would be governance priorities should the MPC get into government. There would be nothing worse, Lizeka, for us to be able to take the MPC, the multi-party charter, opposition-led government, over the 50% line and get into government and not be able to change the lives of South Africans. We need to hit the ground running immediately as soon as we vote the ANC out of power. And so that is our primary goal right now. We are focused on growing our share of the vote. We are focused on forming coalition governments with our multi-party partners. And that's what we're going to focus on. And right between now and election day, we are not interested in having conversations about how do we resuscitate a dying organization that's being relegated to the edges of obscurity.
Dr. Buthelezi, what do you say to this question?
Yeah, I think you just mentioned that our president alluded to this fact. As the IFP, we are part of the multi-party charter. But if we don't actually get 50+1 as the multi-party charter, Inkatha is open to any political party, including the ANC, including the EFF, all other parties. That will be determined after, but our first goal is to get into government with our partners in the charter, because we are of the view that the ANC with the majority is different from this arrogant ANC because of their outright. Because what is actually taking them down the drain is because of their arrogance, because they know that they've got the majority. It doesn't matter what you say, as all other parties, they will know that they will beat you in the vote. So what will happen is that if we don't get that 50+1, then the IFP is open to anyone. And at the end of the day, all the parties that will be voted into parliament, including independents, will be given a mandate by people of this country to form a government. So whether one party gets a majority or not, at the end of the day, government is formed by the same people. And I think we must actually grow as a democracy now, because if we have such discussions, there is not even a single thing that as members of parliament agree on. What kind of leaders are we? Because our mandate is clear. We are here to serve these people. And if we can't agree to form a coalition with anyone, that means we are not actually serving the interests of the same people who elected such leaders into power.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go straight to you, Mr. Problem. Your response to what has been said by both the DA and the IFP and PEPs, you could shed some light on the government of national unity.
No, they can speak for themselves, and they have. I want to go to your question about government of national unity. A leopard doesn't change its spots, so we will not go into a government of national unity with the ANC. We've made that quite clear from the beginning to the end. We will go into a government of national unity with parties that share ideologies, that on principal issues like a free market, capitalism, property ownership, who are anti-nationalization and nationalism because it only brings the worst out of us. Government cannot run state-owned enterprises. It can't run the post office. It can't run Eskom. It can't run PRASA. It can't run Janelle. It can't run anything. But they want to run banks and businesses. Aibo, asnokwas. But with those that share our values and philosophies, no problem. We can put South Africa first.
Mr. Shivambu, you have been deemed enemy number one by some in this panel.
No, look, I think let's treat that last 4.5 minutes as a commercial break, because there is no multi-party charter which is going to any government here in South Africa. It will never happen. One is that the EFF is going to win elections, and the commander-in-chief of the EFF will be commander-in-chief of the armed forces in South Africa, head of state and president. So my role has already been clarified. So the commander-in-chief, Julius Malema, will be president after the 29th of May. But if we do not get a decisive majority, I think they're going to now get this clearly for the first time. There's not a single Oppenheimer-funded political party which will be government of South Africa. Not one. There will never be any Oppenheimer puppet in any national or provincial government of South Africa. It will never happen. So whatever arrangement that will culminate in the deliberations, there won't be any Oppenheimer puppet which is going to come anywhere close to the control of our economy, of our resources. We're not some sub-imperialist puppets. We're not children. We're not Nelson Mandela and all those people who negotiated CODESA then. We are clear of what's happening in this country. We know who are our primary enemies. And that continues to be the white, racist, capitalist establishment, which is trying to take over power through these puppet parties. They will never enter. It will never happen.
Very emotive subject, but we need to go to Mr. Pastel before I come to you. Mr. Tau, Government of National Unity, you as the ANC were once part of it?
Well, firstly, let me say that the problem with the Democratic Alliance is that they believe their own propaganda. So they go and they form companies and call them independent survey companies. And with their companies, they convince themselves that the ANC will win because they create their own propaganda to dupe the people of South Africa into believing that they don't believe in the ANC, when the vast majority of the people of this country have confidence in the African National Congress. And that part is very clear. Now, our campaign has reached a point at which it's accelerating. We are confident of victory. As the National Executive Committee of the ANC, we have not discussed coalitions because we are confident that the people of this country are committed to transformation. Why would they want us to talk to parties that say that we should not have affirmative action, that say that broad-based Black economic empowerment is wrong? The people of this country can't do that. They know that this country requires transformation. It requires participation by Black people, by women, and that it shouldn't be that these people are excluded from the future of this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tau. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you for those very impassioned responses. Now we'll move back to the debate format. Mr. Shivambu, this question is for you. All the parties talk of securing our borders and improving visa procedures. But how do we deal with the large number of undocumented migrants presently in the country?
Look, there's two distinct issues which a lot of people confuse about the EFF's Pan-Africanism and a policy to integrate the entire African continent. There will never be sustainable economic prosperity for the entire continent if it is not integrated. That question couldn't be resolved in 1963 when the OAU was formed. And as a generation, we have to resolve that question, that what colonialism did was to subdivide us into small and viable states that are unable to develop by themselves. So we are purposefully going to integrate the infrastructure, rail infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, water systems, so that the entire African continent collectively prosper. When Japan was realizing economic growth after the Second World War, it played a central role in the economic development of South Korea. It played a central role as well in the economic development of the People's Republic of China. Check what Deng Xiaoping did in the early periods of opening up. Learned a lot of lessons from what the Japanese were doing. And there was collective development of the entire Asia. It was, by the way, that region, that section of the world was treated and considered in the same way the African continent is considered. Of lazy people, of dark continent, of a hopeless people who do not have any form of potential prosperity. It's foolhardy, it's actually foolishness to think that we're going to pursue the economic expansion of South Africa only without the collective effort that seeks to develop the entire continent. And to achieve that, you need the free movement of goods and people. The Africa Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Era deals with that aspect far much more clearly. And that is the direction that we must take, all of us. Don't listen to anyone else who tells you anything else, because it will never happen. It's like this thing of the ANC of say they're going to create 2.2 million jobs when there's 11 million people who are unemployed. We won't be able to deal with unemployment unless if we collectively put our resources as the African continent. But then the second issue is, how do you deal with migration? What do you do to migrants, whether they came here for socio-economic reasons, for whatever reason? Do you treat them like animals? Do you refuse them access to primary basic health care? Do you refuse them basic burial rights, such that those trucks that are carrying goods and people and live human beings are also carrying carcasses of people who have died in the informal settlements? We can't be that inhuman. We need to have a progressive internationalism and Pan-Africanism that, one, leads to common economic prosperity and protects particularly African immigrants here in South Africa. That is our position.
Thank you so much. Next, Action SA, please.
Well, first of all, I think it's important for South Africans to understand that you have legal immigration and illegal immigration. Legal immigration, tourists, people who want to invest money here, people who want to come and create jobs, people who bring skills, that's all no problem. Illegal immigration, the people who come here on their own accord, is a problem. If I can quote from the good book, John 10:1, it says, "Verily I tell you, the man who enters the sheep pen by any other means other than the gate is a thief and a robber." This country, talk about wealth, talk about whatever, this country was the wealthiest country with the biggest economy in Africa. While we were the small little South Africa, we can do it again. So we have to secure our borders. Before we send troops to the DRC and to secure the border of Rwanda, we need to secure our own borders. Charity begins at home. Our troops are dying in the DRC trying to secure somebody else's border while we're not securing our own. People come across our border. Cigarette smugglers, the people who fund some political parties, who say other people won't go to, those parties that are funded by cigarette smugglers are also not going to govern this country. So here's the thing. Don't poke fingers at other people when you know where your money comes from. Comes across open borders. So why do they want open borders? Imali yabo iza ngeebhoda ezivulekileyo.
Thank you. IFP.
Thank you very much. I think I listened very carefully when we were guided to say we are not in a beauty contest, so I'm not going to enter into that territory. But the IFP is very clear. Illegal foreigners are law breakers, period. So the IFP is going to make sure that we fortify our borders and make sure that there is maximum control as to who comes in and who goes out. We are going to, if we take over, we are going to give them 6 months, the illegal foreigners, to show themselves into authorities and regularize themselves, failing which we are going to deport them. Because this is actually taking so much from our economy in terms of government allocate so much money for a number of South Africans. And if you've got millions who are unaccounted for, and the same people are the ones that are benefiting, rightfully so, but they must be registered and be known that we've got so many foreigners in our country who are actually having access to our resources. So the IP will make sure that they are regularized, failing which we're going to deport them, and we're going to make sure that we reserve 80% of jobs in this country for South Africans, and only 20% jobs can be taken by foreign nationals, because we can't have South Africans who are actually living on their empty tummy because most of their jobs, even entry-level jobs, have been taken by foreigners. And us as South Africans, you can't cross any border to any country willy-nilly as they come to our own country.
Thank you. On to the ANC.
Thank you. I think the first thing that we should not do is to be in a situation where we limit the issue of migrants to Africans, because we have a migration problem from across the continents that come into our country. So we should not stigmatize Africans when we're talking about migration. But I think that as we talk about it, we need to differentiate the people that come into this country. There are people who are genuine refugees that come into this country, and we must be able to address their plight. We have an obligation as humans, as a country that believes in human rights, to ensure that we're able to address the plight of refugees. We've got the situation of Zimbabwe that led to special dispensation as a result of challenges in Zimbabwe because we're responding to the reality of a particular pressure point. So we did not just willy-nilly say, everybody come in. We said, well, there are specific categories of people that we need to address their plight, and this is the reality in Zimbabwe. Therefore, how do we create a special dispensation? However, we need to acknowledge that there are undocumented migrants who have come into this country illegally, and we need to take the appropriate action. Now, what are we doing? We've restructured our management of our borders through the Border Management Authority. We're looking at legislative changes to tighten legislation to deal with migrancy. But we also understand the interdependence of countries on the African continent. And therefore, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is about mutual growth, mutual benefit, so that we all grow together.
Thank you. And now on to the DA.
Thank you very much. Securing our borders is obviously something that is incredibly useful and is incredibly important. But I think it's very, very important for this to be said. It's important that we do not scapegoat foreign nationals in this country and use them for political ends. When the ANC fails to deliver basic services to the people of South Africa, grow the economy, get people into jobs, it does not mean that people and political parties and political leaders should have the liberty to be able to essentially scapegoat foreign nationals. Because it's important. The reason why that is important, we saw what happened in 2008. We don't want a repeat of that. So how would we as the Democratic Alliance fix the problem? Number one is don't build a washing line and call it a border fence like Minister DeLille did. Build proper fencing around the country and make sure that your borders are secure. Fix the problem at Home Affairs. You've got a corruption rot at Home Affairs that is essentially not allowing people who want to regularize properly. They have to either know somebody, pay somebody just to be able to get documented. The other problem at Home Affairs is that it is a sluggish and an ineptitude kind of system where we have not been able to, in 30 years, deal with the kind of demand that is on South Africa. And so foreign nationals are not the problem. ANC governance is the problem in dealing with migration in particular and in dealing with Home Affairs specifically.
Thank you.
Mr. Trollip, this is your question. Given the liberalization of the energy market and the introduction of new technologies onto the grid, how will you ensure electricity prices are affordable?
Thank you very much. As I said earlier, that we have a state-owned enterprise called Eskom that's supposed to provide energy. First of all, it's a monopoly. So monopolies do not give us the best value for money. We who pay for our electricity know that. The tariffs go up by 18%, 20%, and we don't have electricity. Have you ever heard of electricity walking? But it disappears. But we have to pay the highest tariffs. So you need to break the monopoly of Eskom. The only way you're going to do that is to incentivize investment in other energy areas, like, for example, mini hydro schemes. Get private companies to build them. Negotiate contracts with users that will do it, farming communities, small towns. Have rooftop solar for every single house in this country to generate their own electricity. Make sure you can wheel excess electricity back into the grid. We're putting up wind towers everywhere in this country. Many of them are not even switched on. The investment is enormous. The grid is owned by Eskom. The grid is poorly maintained. And Eskom is also notoriously bad at getting payment for electricity. That's why we now have some of the most electricity in the world. If everybody just paid for electricity, user pays principle, we would have cheaper and more affordable electricity. But we do believe that there must be a just transition between fossil fuel-driven energy and new green energy technologies. And it mustn't be stalled because of those people in government now moving out of coal into green energy. We can see you, Sanibon. You've had dirty coal-fired energy interests for the last 30 years. You're now lining yourselves up for clean energy provision, and you are slowing the whole thing down. We need a transition. It must be just, and it must be sensible. I also believe that once you have rooftop solar on every single South African's house, South Africans will have reliable energy in their homes for children to learn at home, for children to study at home, for people to have small businesses in their homes, reliable businesses. People can run incubators. At the moment, if you're a farmer or an aspiring farmer, you cannot even run an incubator to hatch eggs, to have a chicken enterprise. So you need reliable energy, and we need reliable water provision. And if we don't have reliable energy, we will not attract investment. And let me tell you, Volkswagen might have invested 4 billion rand recently in Nelson Mandela Bay. It is a drop in the ocean, but they have had to secure their own electricity provision. They have spent billions of rand on infrastructure for solar energy because the energy provided by this government is not reliable.
Thank you, Mr. Trollip. Perhaps let me come to you, Mr. Shivambu. How do we ensure that electricity is affordable?
Look, no, look, it's not working.
Can anyone help with the mic? Sorry, sir.
So look, before we make it affordable, we must make it available. So South Africa has got abundance of electricity, energy sources. Number one, base load electricity from coal, from the natural gases, from hydrogen. Can also utilize the waterfalls in Lesotho, in part of the rivers in Mozambique as well, to generate electricity, to have hydroelectric power stations that can electrify. We can actually, if we utilize the natural resources that we have in the subcontinent, we can quadruple what Eskom is currently producing from 50,000, or its available installed capacity from 50,000 megawatts to possibly 200,000 megawatts. But you have to have a clear purpose as to what do you want to do. Don't abandon base load electricity in the form of coal and the reliable sources, including nuclear, by the way. We must make electricity available. There are so many models that we can put in place to expand. So before we even get to the affordability part, let's make it available. And the EFF has got the most comprehensive and believable plan, and people who are going to bring back electricity in South Africa. They've done it before. We are working in partnership with established countries to make electricity available, and then it will be affordable, of course, because it will be in abundance. That is what we're going to do.
Thank you, Mr. Shivambu. Kosibuthelezi.
Thank you. I think the IFP will first and foremost try to stabilize Eskom and make sure that it is run efficiently, because the problems of Eskom that actually are causing prices to go up is because it's not run efficiently, and the money that is supposed to be used to maintain Eskom is actually feeding the ANC, as we've been told that Eskom has become a feeding trough for the ruling party. So you stabilize Eskom, take politics outside, make sure that it's done professionally and efficiently. Secondly, you make sure that you also encourage the other uses of power like nuclear, because nuclear is the most cheapest mean of actually producing energy, and also encourage our people to have solars on their house so that for at least lights and cooking, they use their solar to actually lessen the burden on the grid. I think that's what the IFP is going to do.
Mr. Tau?
Well, we have talked about an energy mix that includes different sources of generating energy in the country. And this includes coal, of course. And we've said that coal is part of the energy future of this country within the context of a just transition. But when we're talking about an energy mix, we're equally talking about ensuring that we're able to get greater participation by the private sector and other people in energy generation through independent power producers. So, for example, in Buffalo City, we've just entered into an agreement where an independent power producer would be able to generate electricity, but that you'd have the first uptake from Mercedes-Benz, and therefore they create the ability to leverage their being an offtake so that we're able to invest in that infrastructure. And that energy becomes available to the people of Buffalo City. So when we're talking about independent power producers and an energy mix, we're also looking at innovative ways of investing in this infrastructure. We've created incentives for rooftop solar so that people are able to generate within their households. We have created a mechanism for people that have solar to be able to trade with the grid so that they are able to earn on sell excess energy into the grid. So this is a mechanism through which we facilitate that those who invest in their own energy infrastructure are able to assist the country and ensure access. And through that and a variety of interventions, you will certainly bring the prices down.
Thank you, Mr. Tau. Mr. Biwa.
ESCOM was broken by the ANC in being able to loot the money that was meant to be able to provide services for people. What the Democratic Alliance would do to be able to make sure that people are shielded from the rising cost of electricity is to make sure that when bundle ESCOM, we clean up the rot that is there. The TA governments where we govern in the Western Cape, in the city of Cape Town, we've already started to do what Mr. Tau and his party are still talking about. We've already started making sure that we're creating prosumers, people who are able to generate their own energy and feed it back into the grid and be paid for it. And so those are the kind of things, diversifying your sources of energy is what will make sure that you get cheaper electricity. Lizega, in the last decade alone, electricity has gone up in South Africa by 400%. 400%. That is an indictment. How do you expect somebody who is living on a child grant, who's living on a 350 rand grant, to be able to afford electricity when it has gone up so significantly? First of all, the cost of living crisis is now exacerbated by all of these things. The failures of this government are so interconnected. And at the center, the people who suffer the most, it is the ordinary people at home. So Mr. Tau can talk about these grand plans, but his government is doing none of it. And as long as they're doing none of it, the people of South Africa, the 30 million people who are looking to his government for assistance, they are still looking today, 30 years later. And that's why their time is up.
Thank you, Ms. Kwahome. I'm looking at the time. I think we do have maybe time for one more question before we go to the audience. Sarah, please.
This is a question for the IFP. Given the potential blowback from certain international powers, was South Africa right to go to the ICJ over Israel's war on Gaza?
Can you just repeat that?
Given the potential blowback from certain international powers,
Okay.
was South Africa right to go to the International Court of Justice over Israel's war on Gaza?
I think first of all, we need to clarify our position as the party in relation to our foreign policy outlook. We believe as a party in democracy, liberties of different countries and the rule of law. I think as the South African government having gone there to court, I think it was on the basis of what they thought Israel is doing to Gaza, and at a particular point they believe that Israel is actually intruding or actually causing what you call casualties in Gaza. But as the IFP, we are saying, let us as a country, if we're in charge of government, we're not going to go to court. We're going to try and facilitate between these two countries and ensure that they actually find a common solution between these two countries on the basis of negotiations, as opposed to taking a part where we neglect one part and actually cast aspersions to have said that they are actually killing people in Gaza. The IFP says, if you want to play an independent role, if you want to maintain your impartiality, you don't have to be seen to be taking part. Bring both parties on board and make sure that you mediate, because us taking side with Gaza is meaning to say we don't have to deal with the Israel people and we want even to listen to them. And we are compromised in terms of having to persuade them to cease fire.
Thank you. Mr. Tau, can South Africa be impartial on the Gaza genocide?
Well, firstly, as the ANC, we've been consistent about our support to all the oppressed people of the world. And we understand the role of the international community in ensuring that those people are able to gain their freedom. We understand because we needed the international community when we were fighting for our freedom. We've got the children of Cuba that died in Kutokana Valley. They died because they were fighting our cause, the cause of the Namibians, so that we are able to get our freedom. So yes, countries made sacrifices. We've got many countries that have made sacrifices to ensure that we're able to achieve our freedom. And we believe that we have an obligation as a country to support those who are oppressed. And it is not an assumption that the people of Palestine are discriminated against, that they are oppressed. The reality is that, in fact, when you are a Palestinian living in Israel, you get taxed more than an Israeli. The reality is that they built these walls, the apartheid walls, that separate people from their livelihoods, literally building a wall between you and your farm so that you drive an hour to get to your farm to be able to gain your livelihood. That is discrimination, that is oppression, and all we did was to use the international system. The world met at Bretton Woods. The world agreed on establishing international mechanisms of governance, of accountability. The International Court of Justice was created by this world, and all we did was to make use of that. And that has been justified through the rulings that have been made.
What are the DA's thoughts on this question?
First of all, the Democratic Alliance supports a two-state solution. We are wanting, firstly, to make sure that we've got an independent Israel and an independent Palestine and a secure Israel. The South African government, I won't continue until the booing stops. The South African government.
Please, can we just allow her some respect?
The South African government's decision to approach the ICJ is what it is, and we support it. And now we await for the ICJ's outcome. But we want to be clear about where we stand in this war in the Middle East. Number one is a two-state solution. Number two, we are on the side of peace. We want to make sure that these two countries can coexist. As a political party that supports the rule of law, we will abide by the ICJ's findings on the matter on whether or not there's a genocide taking place in the Middle East. And that's what we have committed ourselves to.
Thank you so much. The EFF?
No, look, the majority of countries in the world and majority of the people in the world are against Israel's Zionist, racist, and colonial war over Palestine. That has been demonstrated on recurrent votes in the United Nations General Assembly, which are undermined by the US imperialist government through the veto which the UN must remove with subsequent changes of the UN system. So there's nothing wrong with South Africa did in approaching the International Court of Justice to hold Israel, backed by the United States, accountable. Also, we need to appreciate everyone else. I'm sure students will pay a close attention to that we are moving away from a unipolar world where there is just one dominance by one imperialist force in the form of America. There's beginning to be emergence of multipolarity in the world now, where there is different sources and bases of power. And that includes the People's Republic of China, the Russian Federation, India, and these are our friends. So we can't be intimidated on whatever foreign policy discussion that we take. In whatever foreign policy decision that we take, we can never be intimidated by the West. We do not need them because in any way, their relationship with us as the African continent has either been colonial or neo-colonial. So we're fine without the West. We are now aligning with the progressive forces. Our position on Israel is correct, and we must continue to intensify it and close the embassy of Israel here in South Africa.
Lastly, Action SA.
Well, first of all, I think when your country goes to the International Court of Justice on behalf of your whole nation, they should actually seek a mandate from the nation. You don't just go there and do your own thing as if you represent everybody. You don't. And if you don't believe me, in the last election, 17 million people voted, 18 million didn't, 10 million voted for this government. And tomorrow, if half of those or a quarter of those 18 million voted, you won't be there anymore. So think and listen. Secondly, let's talk about the facts. There was a provocative attack on Israel. And what happens? It's a fact. There was an attack and people were killed. Innocent civilians were killed. And in war, you get disproportionate response. And there is a disproportionate response. We believe that there's a disproportionate response. But let me tell you another fact. I have seen protestations all over the free world of hundreds of thousands of people meeting in the main cities of the world, calling for the extermination of Israel. That is wrong. I have never seen Israelis protesting in their hundreds of thousands, calling for the extermination of Gaza or Palestine. So here's the thing. Gaza is a Muslim country. Israel is a Jewish country. And Mr. Tau says that the ANC supports all oppressed people. The Jewish people are one of the most oppressed people in the world. They had the greatest genocide against them ever in mankind.
Thank you so much. Sarah, I'm going to go rogue just one more time before we go to the audience. And I want to ask everyone, I'll start with you, Mr. Dao. Some people have said that the electoral process, the electoral system, and in extension, the constitution, should be amended to allow voters to pick and elect their preferred choice of president. What is the ANC's view on this?
Well, firstly, should we as a country continue to discuss options on electoral systems, we certainly believe as the ANC that we should be able to discuss those. We should open the conversation, particularly as we find ourselves in a different situation where, in fact, particularly at local government, we've experienced the coalition governments and the collapse of these coalition governments. So we should be able to think about electoral systems and how we enhance our electoral system. Our view is that there's been ad hoc changes to the electoral system because of court challenges about participation of independents and other mechanisms of that. And our view is that you require a comprehensive review of the electoral system and to be able to update the electoral system. Remember, we agreed on an electoral system many years ago. We agreed on the basis of a breakthrough to get to where we are. There's nothing wrong with us sitting down and reviewing what we've experienced and determine whether a first past the post system is most appropriate. But we are saying that it is a conversation that must be had with the people of this country so that collectively we can arrive at a decision around what is the most optimal electoral system in our country.
Thank you so much. Siviwe, does the PR system still work? Do we need to pick or elect, vote for our own president?
I think that certainly the mic is not working. I think certainly South Africa needs to move towards electoral reform in its entirety. And in fact, there's been plenty of literature written about this. And if one goes back to even the Slabbert report, which is actually in Parliament gathering dust and has not been implemented. So we have had these conversations and these conversations keep going around in circles. But what is really happening, and for me, the biggest crisis here is that we are leaving people out of the democratic process. We are not saying how do we deepen accountability for those who are elected in public office. Ultimately, South Africans need to have a direct way of holding their public reps to account. And at the moment, that is not happening. And so the conversation around electoral reform needs to happen, and it needs to happen not just in terms of reports that need to be commissioned. We need to think carefully about how do we make sure that people have a say in how their democracies meet out. We have also to remember this point, that there are millions of South Africans, particularly young people, who are checking out of the political system because they do not believe that the political system is responding to their needs. That is a crisis that all of us as leaders here need to be concerned about. Ultimately, democracy is not about and for politicians. It is about the people at home to make sure that they elect people that they can then fire when they don't work for them, and not the other way around.
Thank you, Siviwe. Mr. Shivambu?
Yes. Look, we don't agree that you must vote for a president directly. You must vote for an organization, knowing who is the president of that organization. This thing of individualism Doesn't work. The state is a very complex institution. There's no single individual who can run that very huge institution. He must have clear perspective on foreign policy, on the entire government system in all spheres. The judiciary must oversee what happens with the military, the police. As an individual, you can't have that wisdom. Even if you can be 1,000 years old, having read books every day, you can't run the state alone. You must lead it within a collective so that you can be called to order when you make mistakes. But if you have been voted alone, you will say, no, but it's me who entered here by myself. They can't call you to order. They say, no, it's me. They voted for me to be president for the next 5 years. You're going to hold us at ransom for 5 years. But if it's an organization, when you make stupid mistakes, the organization that sent you there must say that that is not how we say you are going to do things. You must step aside or step down. And then we identify someone else to lead there. This liberal individualism must be rejected with the contempt it deserves. It's part of the agenda which is being imposed, by the way, by that Brand Test Institute of the Oppenheimers that wants to stratify organizations in South Africa so that they can infiltrate individuals. We don't agree with that nonsense.
Mr. Trollip, 30 years of democracy, has
I've got it.
the current system worked?
Yeah, I believe, and Action SA believes, that we certainly should have electoral reform. There is a lot of work that's been done. The Van Zyl Commission said that we should have a hybrid system. We already have a hybrid system. At local government, you have directly elected representatives and proportionately elected representatives. It improves accountability. It brings government closer to the people. So we would support that 100%. You know, you need an accountable government. We've got a government that has a policy, an internal policy called step aside. It's just a temporary step aside, one step to the left. And then when the lists get drawn up again, those same people come back on. They're all back on the list. All the step asides are back on the list. There's no accountability. So we agree that we should have directly elected representatives. I also think that it's time in South Africa, with all these multitude of parties that we have, that we introduce a threshold. In order to get representation into parliament or council, there should be a threshold. Can't have these parties with 1 seat or 2 seats that are bought every day by the ANC. We'll make you mayor. That is just a waste of time and effort. So we need to introduce a threshold. And then talking about having a collective to run a country. You know, I agree. You need collective skills, experience to run a country. But you can't have a collective where only one person speaks, because then you are being run by one person.
Thank you, Mr. Trollip. Mr. Buthelezi.
I think from my point of view, the discussion is more than welcome, where we discuss whether or not people should elect a president-direct. But I think what is more important is us to look at the internal democracy in each parties, where I think parties should decide to say, if the IFP, for argument's sake, takes over, who should become the president of the country now? Because we may have a right person in the party to lead the organization, but not the right person to lead the country. I think those discussions should begin in our own parties to make sure that we get the right people in right positions. Otherwise, we're going to have a problem now where if you've got a compromised president in your own country, then by extension, you are giving people of this country that very same compromised leader. Only if then you've got leaders who are seasoned leaders with the leadership of integrity, then you can actually trust our political system as the country. I think as the IFP, we also say, let us throw this ball back to members of parliament as to how do they exercise their responsibility now when it comes to electing the president. Do they actually vote with their hearts or they vote with their mind? Do they become so loyal to their party at the expense of citizens of this country? There's also one discussion to say our system must mature enough now where parties, when they are now members of parliament, they cease to be more of their parties where they come from, but more of leaders of the society.
Thank you, Mr. Buthelezi. Well, Sarah, this is really informative, and I hope the audience is gaining a lot of clarity as to what they will do on the 29th of May. Now, let's take it to them. I'm sure there are people who want to speak to their leaders. I'm sure there are people who want to gain some clarity. There are where are the ushers? Ndiyakubona, Mzwayi. I'm looking for students. Where are the students? One this side, please. The ushers will decide. We have 5. We have space for only 5 questions. The ushers will be, are you a student? One student there? The side. At the back there, if there is a student. Student, community members. Students.
Revolutionary critiques to the broad student.
Yes, sorry, we are still choosing 5 people. How many people do we have now? At the back there, you are standing, say, I see you. You can come. With the white t-shirt. Yes. And this is the last hand. No women? I would like to include, you can come. No other female hand? Yes.
There are so many people in that.
Are there 5 or 6?
There are like 8.
We needed women.
To balance.
Why don't you ask from each party? I mean, how do you know where those people come from?
I think you're represented.
Very long queue.
Go ahead, sir. Please state your name.
Revolutionary critiques to the broad student populace. Standing before you is Revolution Pons, the EMCSRC student services officer deployed by the EFF Students Command and member of the EFF in good standing. Now, my first question, before I ask my question, I want to just first preamble briefly and just stipulate that Action SA, IFP, DA are just Zionist appendages of the imperialist regime.
We want a question, sir. We want a question,
Now,
please.
let's come to my question before you rush me. My question is first to the neoliberal arrangement of Moonshot Pact. What are you going to do when it comes to deliberalizing our economy, which has been under neoliberalism since 1996 to here, which has proved to create jobless growth even under 4 successive presidents of the ANC? The second question I want to ask.
How many questions?
One question per person.
Oh.
Thank you so much, Lindokuhle.
Oh.
Just one more.
Thank you, Lindokuhle. Siyabulela. Siyabulela, bhuti wami. Yes, please state your names.
My name is Ondela Madibizela. I am part of the EFFSC.
Majority. Understandable.
Priority to Action SA. The question was asked before and the guy didn't answer. He was busy quoting isiXhosa as a way to trick our people and to get to violence. You asked that was did your party play in the dysfunction of the coalition government in Gauteng? This is why I want to understand that. And please stop this thing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ondela. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Nicholas Nati, and my question is to Sibiwe. I want to ask about the poverty status in the Eastern Cape. I have taught to Dimaza, where we see the industrial area habitated. Yesterday, I was in Ekomani, where young people don't even have a youth center. Today is a fault. Many of us are going to graduate and are going to go back home, where we cannot even have a source of income that we can afford to buy our own children. So my question to you is, how do you as a party plan on addressing the poverty levels in our beautiful province that has such potential to be a great province amongst the rest of South Africa?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nicholas. You can go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you so much. My name is Anthony Longo, and my question is directed to all the political parties here. My question is, what is the plan around fighting the scourge of gender-based violence? I didn't hear anything around it. We know South Africa is the most unsafest country for women. We are not free to go anywhere, even in institutions of higher learning. We don't have guaranteed protection. So what is the plan around that? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akumile. Next in line.
We can't hear. We can't hear.
Sorry, sir, will you please speak into the mic a bit clearer? Yes, thank you.
I think my question would be to the opposition, the current opposition, the people that maybe we think that their content is correct. The question to you would be that I think you are far-fetched from the reality.
Question, Bandibel. No, question, please.
Before I can be able to bring a question, I must bring context.
No, we want a question.
My question needs context so that it can be understood as I deliver. So at certain times it may be misunderstood. Allow me to deliver the question with a bit of context. And please 10 seconds in between. Thank you very much. I think my discussion to you will be very simple. Your detachment on neoliberal approaches to a post-apartheid South Africa that had been fought for our people. Now, firstly, you spoke about housing, especially in municipalities. But I think that you did not speak about indigenous. The first question would be, do you understand what indigenous is in municipality? And do you understand in the second
Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Maschaba Mbati, and I have 2 questions here. So,
Maschaba, you only have one question. One question, Maschaba.
Okay. The first question is directed to the EFF. So I'd like to know, Mr. Floyd, what is your stance on the privatization of the state-owned companies with careful reference to the ESCOM and also SAA. Number 2.
Thank you, Maschaba. Uyandizama ngoku. Yes, sir.
Man, Chabatel to man, Bruce, Wogundola Pagli. Ikamalam to Luna to Abambulo. Swabella as a I can't do today is the ANC. ANC lead South Africa for 30 years. But the Zanga ANC. The least. My question is that you say you will be able to call a Lufas Wako, I could sit there for 30 years. For 30 years, your wife telling the same people,
Enkosi Lunathi. Enkosi Lunathi. More of a statement than a question, I suppose. Yes, sir.
This is Ian Ruggiero, and I just want to know if
Sorry to interrupt. Can I get your name again? Okay, but Ayanda Diabule.
So, what I want to know is that if you really, when you come into power, whether national, provincial, or local, how are you going to expose funds to education and graduates? If they are the only ones who can make a major impact in the economy of the country. I want to know what are the actual actions as to the unemployment of graduates, like big practicality.
Ayanda siyabulela bhuti wami. Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Ruby Bechi, Constituent Chairperson from the Ndlanda region. My question is posed to my chairperson, Mr. Electoral. We both know the importance of water security and water waste management. Decreased water supplies means increased risk of instability, conflict, and migration. Polluted water creates disease. Often, mostly.
Can we please get to the question? I must apologize.
Areas affected by these problems are impoverished and lack the necessary resources. Please share with the audience how we as Action SA will change our disastrous water security and wastewater management systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, Sarah, very important questions.
Okay. I believe the first question was directed to members of the so-called Moonshot Pact.
The multi-party charter.
Yes, of course. What are you going to do to deliberalize the economy? We'll start with the DA.
Look, joblessness is a crisis in South Africa, as I had indicated earlier. The fact that 7 out of 10 young people in South Africa are without work is, in fact, a crime. Because ultimately, how do you get an economy working when you've got the majority of your workforce at home doing nothing? So how would we make sure that we create jobs? Number one, you've got to do the basics. The only way you can attract businesses into any environment, whether it's a city, whether it's a province, you've got to make sure that you can keep the lights on, Mr. Dawo. It's important to keep the lights on. It's important to keep the taps flowing with water. It's important to make sure that we've got basic service delivery. Otherwise, you've got companies that are fleeing in the droves. There's an example, an apt example of Clover in Northwest that left after having repeatedly said to the Northwest government, we cannot continue being here. And when they were left with 3,000 jobs. That is over 3,000 families that will go without work. And so for us as the MPC, we are committed in saying that joblessness is a crisis that needs to be solved. You cannot solve poverty. You cannot solve all our other social ills without dealing with the issue of unemployment. And there are easy wins. There is low-hanging fruit in South Africa, things that we can do to jolt this economy up, to get people to work. It's just simply that we need a better government. And that's why we formed the multi-party charter.
Thank you. Mr. Trollip, the multi-party charter, what are your plans to deliberalize the economy?
We don't want to deliberalize the economy. We don't want to do that. We want an economy that works, an economy that puts people into work. If GEAR didn't work, get rid of the party that instituted GEAR and gave us jobless growth. And I love it when other political parties ask me questions, because that means that they're interested in about what we want to say. So what we're going to tell you is that we're going to deal with crime. We're going to deal with corruption, and we will make sure that we spend money on economic infrastructure. Unless you do that, you'll never attract investment, and we won't put people into work. But then we also need to hold a mirror to ourselves. We need to look at our productivity. Our productivity is compromised. A World Bank survey of our 3 biggest ports in this country found that we were number 351, 350, and 349 respectively. Our ports are the least productive in the world. Bill Johnson wrote that Maputo is eating Durban's lunch. Ships are not going through the Suez Canal. They're going around the Horn of Africa, round the Point of Africa, because the Suez Canal is closed. But they're not stopping in South Africa. They're going right past South Africa. They're stopping in Maputo. They're stopping in Mauritius, and they're offloading ships who are onto reefer ships that are bringing product back into South Africa. So we need to improve our productivity. Unless we do that, we will not grow the economy, and we will have more and more people depending on 350 Rand a month.
Thank you. Lastly, the IFP, if not deliberalization, then what?
Okay, but I think what is important here is that as members of the multi-party charter, we don't agree on everything. That is why there is an exclusion clause in the same what you call charter. As the IFP, we're not opposed to legislation that seeks to favor black people. We're not opposed to that. But what we're going to do as the IFP, we're going to make sure that we industrialize our country. We make sure that there's industry in each and every district where our people will be employed, and will encourage local production and local consumption. And I've alluded to the fact that we're going to be deliberate in reserving jobs for South Africans at a ratio of 80-20, 80 for local people and 20 for foreign nationals, and only on those skills that we do not have. And when we employ them in those fields, there must be a clear plan as to how they transfer the skills to our own people. The IFP is going to make sure that we also transform the education system so that it produces what is needed in the job market as opposed to what's happening today. And the IFP is going to introduce what we call a local economic grant, a conditional grant that will seek to assist our small, medium enterprises to actually get substantial amount of money to be able to start their own businesses and be supported. That's what the IFP is going to do.
Thank you so much. I believe Wandela was making a statement, so I will move on to Nicholas. I think there's quite a few questions which are really important that we hear.
We've taken the notes, Mos. Can't we respond to the questions that we want to respond to, and then you give us equal time, all of us?
You want to respond to this question?
We're listening to the questions. We heard them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. You want to respond to the questions?
Yeah. We heard the questions. We heard the questions. We're taking notes here. We are public representatives, all of us.
Go ahead, Mr.
To want to now put a different context, because although certain questions could have been given to specific parties, we have got opinions as well about what was said by the deployee of the Student Command to the SRC here, that he draws a very clear and cogent relationship between neoliberalism and joblessness in South Africa since the adoption of GEAR, something which the other guy from SASCO failed to draw. He then says it's now a responsibility of all opposition parties who are neoliberal, which the ANC is the most neoliberal organization in the Southern Hemisphere. So it's one of the things that we have to then deal with, that we have to deliberalize South Africa's economy. We need to do something called inward industrialization, where we produce the goods and services and products that we consume on a daily basis, because we import virtually everything, meaning that we're creating jobs for manufacturers and assemblers elsewhere, whilst there is huge capacity, even from a fiscal point of view, where we can produce our own goods and services, and then we utilize first the buying capacity of the state to make those industries viable, and then we create millions of jobs. It can be from the smallest thing, toilet paper, toothpick, matchstick, to the most complex of things of shipbuilding even, and vehicles. Just how many cars does the state own? If we're saying that South African government is going to buy only state-owned, South African-made cars, we can create millions of jobs, because the government garage is far much bigger than any other garage that you can ever think of. So those are the deliberalization components of moving away from neoliberalism, which we must look into. And thank you very much, Fighter, for the clear question. We hear you.
Yeah. Would you also like to respond?
Yeah.
Mr. Taleb.
I thought we were all going to get equal time to respond to the questions.
But you spoke already.
I believe that you have spoken on it.
On the same question you spoke.
It was a multi-party.
That's a problem. You said 5 questions. Now there are 10 questions. How are we going to answer them?
Please
Lizaka,
allow us.
spoke on the same
We
question.
had to allow students to ask you every question, sir. Please just indulge us.
So with respect, do I only get to answer the question that the moderator decided that I should answer?
You have agreed with.
No, I
Mr.
did not.
Chivambu.
I said we should be given equal time and
And
let's
we will.
answer the questions we want to answer.
And you will, sir.
You're 100.
We'll make sure that you have that.
100%.
You will make sure that you have that space. Now we are giving. Please allow us to give Mr. Pakstow some time to respond if he so chooses to.
We have said as the ANC in our manifesto that we should focus on industrialization and reindustrialization. And this includes, amongst others, ensuring that we create 1,000 more Black industrialists so that they contribute towards the growth of the economy of this country. We have said that we should focus on our minerals as a country and ensure that we're able to beneficiate the minerals of this country. We have said that it is important that all of society benefits from the mineral wealth of our country. Through that, we have a special dispensation of generating revenue from the mineral base so that we are able to create mechanisms that are able to invest in the economy of this country. So that's a commitment of the ANC. Our commitment remains that this economy requires fundamental transformation, that you need to ensure access for Black people to the economy, access to women into the economy, that you need to create opportunities to participate in the different facets of society, in management, in acquiring the skills to be able to participate in the economy of this country. Our approach is about deliberately creating policies that affirm those historically disadvantaged and broaden the base of entrepreneurs in this country so that it is not about the benefit of individuals, it's about the benefit of society as a whole.
Sivu, I'll start with you on this question, and if anyone else wants to respond to it as well. How do you address the poverty levels in the Eastern Cape? It was addressed to you by Nicholas.
yeah. Lizaka, the issue of the West at the Eastern Cape is deeply saddening. My mic's not working. We all watched in horror as we saw the story of the woman in Butterworth, a mother who had to make a difficult decision to kill herself and her children because it was known that she was struggling under the yoke of a cost of living crisis. And here's the difficulty with this cost of living crisis is that there are ways in which government can cushion people who are struggling, people who are poor, who are living below the breadline, and yet government chooses not to do so. Number one, you can expand the basket of basic goods that are zero VAT rated. We have often asked for this in Parliament to the Minister of Finance. It is within his ability, he can do so. But already by doing that, you are already cushioning people from hunger. Number two, obviously you have to start creating jobs because you cannot say to people, "Mabanele njenge 350. You've got to get people into work so that they can work and live a life of dignity. Number three, we believe as the Democratic Alliance that you've got to increase the child grant. The child grant as it stands is insufficient to raise a child that will be able to go to school and be able to be productive. But these things can only happen when you change a government so that you can have people who are not stealing the money, so you can channel it to frontline services like alleviating poverty for people.
Thank you. Would you like to address that
Yes.
question? Okay.
You know, by all forms of measurements, the Eastern Cape is possibly the poorest province in terms of infrastructure, in terms of household poverty as well. I think there are certain things which we spoke about in the EFF in the province here as well, that because there's multiple crises in every sector, maybe let's maybe look into dedicating each year to resolve one problem. We say that in year one of us being government, let's resolve the water crisis. Dedicate all energy and then we close it. Next one, healthcare infrastructure, clinics, hospitals, we close it. The other year, go to schools, build schools, remove the mud schools, remove the pit toilets, we close it. The other year, we go to the different sectors of the critical infrastructure here in the province. Because since 1994, there have been attempts to do so many things at the same time, And there's not been a resolution of even one sector of social services here in the Eastern Cape. There's crisis with hospitals, there's crisis with water infrastructure, there's crisis with schools, there's crisis with the roads, there's crisis with everything. We need to take a different approach so that when we look back 5 years of being government here in the Eastern Cape, we can say that they can fault us for anything, but we dealt with the question of education, we dealt with the question of healthcare, we dealt with the question of making sure that our people are safe in their communities. That is what we need to do here in the province.
Thank you, Mr. The Premier candidate of Action SA in the Eastern Cape. The question is, if you'd like to address it, how do you address the poverty levels in this province? How do you address the poverty levels in this province as Action SA?
I'll pass on that. I want to answer questions that were asked to me. There are
Go
two
ahead.
questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, the lady who asked about gender-based violence. I take my hat off to you. I'm sorry there were no questions from the panel about gender-based violence. The fact of the matter is that in this province, Nelson Mandela Bay is the crime capital of the country, followed by Mthatha. Nelson Mandela Bay is also the most violent city in South Africa. It's also the 9th most violent city in the world. Every day, 72 women get raped. Those are the women that report their cases. People have given up reporting rape cases. There was a notorious case in Motherwell in Nelson Mandela Bay recently where a woman went to a clinic to report that she was raped and she needed medical assistance. They sent her to the police. The police sent her back to the clinic. She died en route to the clinic. We are not serious about dealing with gender-based violence in this country. This question to me about water. We've built no dams in this country. Our population is growing and we've built no new dams and finished them. The Giyani water scheme has been waiting nearly 10 years and the taps are empty. But you don't have to go to Giyani. Go to any lali here in the Eastern Cape and you will see reservoirs, pipelines and taps that are dry. I can take you to them. I was there yesterday. Mpekweni, and Moshwa. Ilali, zine taps, koda commands. And I'm going to speak in Xhosa so that people can understand. If you don't look after water, you will run out of life. And if you let your rivers be polluted with sewage, then even if you have water, you can't use it.
Thank you, Mr. Trollip. That Mutelezi, I'm sure you'd like to address the GBV
Yes.
question.
Yeah, I think the IFP, what it's going to do, and this is a problem, and I highlighted it on my introductory remarks here, to say our women and young girls are going on the street under the shelter of fear, which is an indictment on all of us to have failed to protect them. We are going to apply the law without fear and favor. And in our manifesto, we are very clear. We are saying we're going to open a dialogue to bring back the death penalty on such issues, because you cannot have people who repeatedly rape our women and get away with the matter. So a death penalty should be reintroduced to deal with such heinous crimes in this country. That's what the IFP is going to do. But also, we should not make this only the government responsibility. It's our responsibilities also as the society. Because if I'm not treating my wife well, I'm not actually sending a lesson to my son as to how he must do the same to his wife. And if I'm not educating my young boys as to how they should respect and protect their sisters, I'm also guilty as charged. So this is a responsibility that we must all take. It begins in our own homes. We must educate our young men and train them to be responsible citizens and be number one defender of women in this country. Government cannot actually succeed doing this alone. It's our problem as a society. It's a pandemic that we all have to address collectively.
Mr. Tau?
Well, firstly, the Eastern Cape has created more than 143,000 jobs since 2019. Practical jobs in the Eastern Cape, and we can account for that. The reality is that Mr. Trollip here spoke about investors don't want to come to this country. And we showed him the investors that are coming to this country, and he grudgingly admitted. So you will also grudgingly admit that jobs have been created in the Eastern Cape. We, however, acknowledge that jobs would not be able to reach everybody at the same time, that we have a mountain to climb. Therefore, we need to look at the plight of the poor. We have said in our manifesto that we are looking at the social relief of distress grant, or what they call the 350, as a means through which we can build into a basic income grant for the people of this country. And we should not be disparaging to the poor that you would be able to receive money to be able to feed your children. Therefore, government is doing something wrong. It's something fundamentally important. The poor should not be allowed to go hungry because some political parties think that the poor are not important. The poor should be able to gain access to food. They should be able to gain access to health and different subsidy systems, whether it's the child support grant that we introduced, whether it's the basic income grant and other interventions that mitigate against the poverty amongst the poor people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Kwahube? Ms. Kwahube.
Yes. First of all, I just want to quickly rebut something that Mr. Tao has said, because I want to spend my time responding to the GBV issue. The problem here is that Mr. Tao was talking about how they're the political party that cares about the poor. It is factually incorrect. There were measures that I listed here that the government of the East, the West, the government of the ANC can implement immediately to prevent the poor from going hungry. Why don't you increase the child social grant so that you can make sure that it is at least at the level of the food poverty line? Why don't you extend the basket of services, the basket of zero-rated goods, so that you can make sure that poor people are able to put food on the table? It is your party, sir, that hates poor people and not the other way around. The issue around GBV is very, very important that was asked. The DA's offer on this is simple. We want to be able to halve violent crimes when we get into government. We want to make sure that we devolve policing powers to capable provinces so that we do not have just a national policing strategy. We can agree that a strategy that works in the Western Cape is not the same kind of strategy that would need to be implemented in the Eastern Cape. So we're saying when it particularly comes to GBV, you've got to make sure that you've got targeted approaches that are not only just decided on in Pretoria, but you are allowing provincial government departments to target the issue of GBV because it's a crime and it's a scourge and it's something that all political parties here should be able to be concerned about and have solutions for.
Thank you. Lastly, the EFF on gender-based violence. Before we wrap up, we have to close soon.
Yeah, no, thanks. You know, South Africa is an extremely violent country when it's measured in terms of interpersonal violence, where we have got 27,000 murder cases annually. That is more than war zones where people are being bombed by flying machines. So that the killings amongst it, and in that equation, women and children become casualties of an otherwise very violent society, which, by the way, is strangely happening in about 20% of police districts in South Africa. And there has to be proper detailed attention to that. The Eastern Cape is to be the Sikisiki, Flagstaff, Mthatha, of course, Nelson Mandela Bay, in terms of what happens. And that has to be, there must be detailed and closer attention, particularly to the criminal justice systems of what happens there. And in relation to gender-based violence, I don't think that the police stations that are being utilized for these other common crimes should be the same platform where women go to report gender-based violence. They are not friendly. It's not possible, even the manner in which those who are taking the statements deal with those cases. It's not friendly. Like they shout at them, please explain what happened and all of those things there. We need to create safe spaces for females to report gender-based violence. And then the criminal justice system must expeditiously be able to resolve all these problems that are confronting our society. Then we'll be able to deal with the problem much more sustainably.
Thank you, Mr. Chivambu. We are now nearing the end of this debate. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Can we please have closing remarks? We've got 2 minutes. Siviwe, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to extend a special word of thanks to the audience tonight, because ultimately it is you who has to make the decision on where to put your eggs on the 29th of May. And we want to make sure that our political system does not leave you out, because you must hold us accountable as political leaders and not the other way around. But I want to assure you I want to assure you about a couple of things that as the Democratic Alliance, we are committed to, should you lend us your vote on the 29th of May. Number one, we want to make sure that we lift people out of poverty. Indlala is a crime, and we cannot allow the situation where in 2024, kukhona abantwana abaswelekayo besweleka yindlala. Starvation, South Africa is not a poor country. It is poorly led. And why are people dying of hunger? Number two, we want to make sure that we get particularly young people into work. There are ways and means of doing that. I would hate for the people who graduate in this hall to go and sit at home and not have a job, like the 70% of young people who are sitting at home. It is not fair, not unfair on your dreams, and it's not fair on your parents who have sacrificed a lot for all of you to be here. Number three, we want to make sure that we keep the lights on. Make no mistake, you cannot grow an economy where your lights are not working, where ESCOM is not working. We want to make sure that your taps have water. You cannot grow an economy where basic service delivery is not delivered. Number four, we want to make sure that we cut corruption. We can only cut corruption, I will add this, by cutting their power on the 29th of May. We want to make sure that we cut corruption because you see, corruption is not a victimless crime. Corruption has a direct impact on how much money is spent on healthcare, how much money is spent on education, because the more that is stolen for basic services by cadres, the more that is taken away from you, which is your money. We want to make sure that we have violent crime so that, as the lady that asked, that we can be free, not only as women in rural communities, to walk in our communities. And that is what is important to the Democratic Alliance and is our offer to you.
Thank you, Siviwe. Mr. Tau, 2 minutes.
Well, let me say that this government, led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, has cut corruption. That a report was released in this week that says that corruption has dropped under the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa. So we're not talking about an intention, a dream, or something that we want to think about. It's practical action that is corroborated by Corruption Watch about the actions that have been taken by this government led by President Ramaphosa. Now, I think it's important that we also focus on the development issues of this country. There was a question raised about what has the ANC done in the past 30 years. Well, practically, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the reality that 30 years ago, you would have driven here in the Eastern Cape from East London to Ellis, and the bulk of these areas would not have had electricity. These lights did not create themselves. The reality is that people did not have access to electricity, they have access today. People did not have access to water, they have access today. People did not have access to decent housing, they have access today. Young people did not have access to education, they have access today. They are able to gain access to free education in the basic education system, in the higher education system. These are efforts of the African National Congress and its government. These are practical efforts that have been achieved by this government of the ANC. And yes, you can boo because the truth hurts. The truth that the propaganda you want to believe should be imbibed by those who don't want to hear the truth. Truth is, we've made progress as this government and will continue to make progress, and our focus will remain fundamental transformation and ensuring the emancipation of those historically disadvantaged in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tau. Mr. Buthelezi, your turn, sir. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. What I want to say to people of South Africa is that our future is hanging in the balance.
Protection.
Can I be protected?
Can we please allow the speaker? Can we please allow the speaker? Speak, sir.
I'm saying to people of this country that our country is hanging in the balance and we cannot continue on this trajectory that we are on. The ANC has betrayed us. Testament to that is the following. Today we have a new generation which has never existed, a generation of people whom we call paras. our young, brilliant men and women who have been rejected by the system that was meant to actually protect them, which is an indictment to the ANC. A vote to this ruling party is actually making sure that this generation that has never existed continue. And some of the students seated here, if they do not change this system, they are going to be added on the numbers of those young, brilliant men who are loafing on the streets because the system has actually betrayed them. We are saying as the IFP, let us close this door behind us, this door of corruption, unscrupulous leaders, and open the new door that will usher us in the new era, the era of the IFP. Let us make the 29th of May a year that we are going to remember, a year where all of us shall all say that is the year where everything actually changed, a year where we are going to the Marikana, a year we are going to forget about the Guptas, the year that we are going to make sure that we forget about the Nkanda scandal, a year that we are going to forget about the Palapala, the recent stain, which is a serious stain on our nation, which is what has happened to the Speaker of this. This is telling us that from the ANC, we cannot accept anything. We must never continue to vote them in. Let us usher in a new era, our own future, the future that we hope for, a future for our future generations. Thank you very much.
Excellency.
First of all, I must agree with Mr. Tau when he said growth and development is difficult to see. I agree. Growth and development is difficult to see in the Eastern Cape. Half the province is unemployed and 70% of the youth are unemployed. It's very difficult to see. Refugees must be treated humanely, but refugees do not deserve South African ID books. Neither do people from our neighboring countries deserve ID books that they buy for 2,500 Rand and come across the rivers into our country every payday. Bamkelisasa. We cannot afford that. I want to just conclude by saying, and I want to be very frank, and I told the Vice-Chancellor that I was going to say this, because we must be honest about where we find our country. The state of our country is no better or worse reflected by the current state of this once iconic university and great institution of continental learning. Sadly, and I say this without prejudice, Fort Hare is now renowned for exclusion of students who are not funded. Students are wondering where their next meal is going to come from, and they're being evicted by their landlords. The university is known and renowned for issuing questionable degrees to politicians. It's renowned for fraud and corruption and murder and assassination and racketeering. Tragically, this is a microcosm and a reflection of what our country has become, and that has become under the ANC. So if I might pirate a quotation from Brutus in William Shakespeare, and I want to say that I didn't come here to praise the ANC. We came here with my colleagues to remove the ANC from government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tollet. Mr. Shivambu.
No, thank you very much to the University of Fort Hare for hosting us. That is the only reason why we came, is because this was hosted by the University of Fort Hare. And we want to thank the people of the Eastern Cape for the growing support that we are giving to the EFF. We are definitely going to be the #1 political party after the 30th of May. If we're not #1, we're going to be #2. The young people, particularly those of you who are organized in SASCO, ANC, League, who were there before, but we always subside to logic. We do not just follow things as they are. Your sole reason not to vote for the ANC is just to read their manifesto. They are saying they're going to create 2.2 million jobs in the next 5 years when there's 11 million unemployed people. So only two out of the 10 unemployed people are going to be given jobs. That is their plan, which is not going to materialize in any way. So if you still are going to vote for the ANC, you are just voting for joblessness and hopelessness and no direction. There's nothing that is going to happen under these people. The less said about this multi-party charter, the better. Because these are not political parties, they are puppets of the Oppenheimers, all of them. And you know what are the interests of the Oppenheimers? They want to keep the status quo. In the genealogy of the Oppenheimers is Cecil John Rhodes, who ravaged this country. The wealth of the Oppenheimers came through the rape, through the savaging of our country. We as a generation will never allow, they must never allow that to happen. Let's appreciate a simple thing that those of you even from the different political parties, politics is not like football where you support Kaizer Chiefs even when it's losing games every day. We must always listen to logic, and the logic comes from the economic freedom fighters that let's make this 2024 to about 1994. Amanda!
Thank you. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you.
I think we are done.
Wenyamaza.
Thank you very much.
Wenyamaza. Shosho. Yolesa.
Thank you so much. The amount of noise. Exactly. It's science. It's making sense. It's science. And making sense. You know, we have a responsibility for the government. We can't just take this and I don't want to hide nothing. Yabona xa uza kuhlanganisa ezinjeni i-strategies political